Hey everybody, so just at the top here, we are talking about Every Young Man's Battle. And if you don't know, this is an evangelical book about sex and sexuality. It's got some really wild and bad ideas about sex. Obviously, we're going to be taking down a lot of this. We're going to be laughing at a lot of this, criticizing it. But I just want to say off the top, like there is some really heinous stuff in here. So if that's something that, you maybe feel like not comfortable listening to or dealing with, or at some point during the episode, you're like, this is, hearing this stuff, this genuinely pretty hateful stuff sometimes is too much for me. Please do not feel like, obligated to keep on listening. We want you to be comfortable and everything. So, yep. Appreciate everybody. And for those of you that are interested to get deep into the evangelical psyche, Lenore, why don't you read the quote at the top of the episode here? I'm pretty sure it's really good, actually.
Oh, doesn't even begin to cover it. Once you were a proud Mustang, wild and free, sleek and rippling. You ranged the hills and valleys, running and mating where you willed, master of your destiny. God,
Mm.
owner of a large local ranch, noticed you from a distance as he worked his herd. Though you took no notice of him, he loved you and desired to make you his own. He sought you in many ways, but you ran from him again and again.
Shame.
One day, he found you trapped in a deep, dark canyon with no way out. With the lariat of salvation, he gently drew you near, and you became one of his own. He desired to break you, that you might be useful to him, and bring him further joy. But knowing your natural ways and how you love to run free with the mares, he set a fence around you. This corral was the perimeter of the eyes. It stopped the running and kept you from sniffing the winds and running wildly over the horizon. While the corral stopped the running, it hasn't yet stopped the mating. You mate in your mind through attractions, thoughts, and fantasy, flirting and neighing lustily at the mares inside or near your corral. You must be broken.
18 naked cowboys at God Ranch.
Who up mating in their mind?
I'm always doing that.
I'm
Jesus.
sorry, God lariated this horse?
Uh,
Did he then like power bomb it from the top ropes?
Ryan, this is all very simple, and if you don't understand, you gotta go read the book.
I'm from Texas. This shit speaks to me. It's in my blood.
Yeah.
Socialist Shelf. We good goods and organize yourself. Socialist Shelf. We good goods and organize yourself.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf. It is time to deal with every young man's battle. I've been fighting the battle a long time. Since my youth, been fighting this battle, and now it's time to bring it to you. And to join us, we have returning guests, now tied for most returning guest with Aisha. Uh, Josh Boerman, welcome back to the pod, Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh. Yes, I am one of the co-hosts of the Worst of All Possible Worlds podcast. I have been fighting every young man's battle now for 34 years. I came out of the womb a young man, and I've been fighting hard ever since.
You've been
Respects.
fighting hard ever
Yep,
since.
yep.
And yeah, this is a book that for me was something that I was given essentially right after I asked what sex was. This was maybe not right after, but this was given to me very young. I maybe read this at 11, something like that.
Good
Uh,
God.
Reread it again a little later on. And then I was actually assigned it in a sex ed class at my Christian high school where it was
Sweet.
further read, discussed, laughed at, and I believe by a few guys, some of the passages like jacked off over. Josh
Some of
or
those.
Lenore, what is your background with this? Just this amazing piece of work before we get into it.
Well, I don't know if it was given to me, but I
Mhm.
definitely remember reading it.
Sure.
And the reason that I remember reading it, and I know that I have read it, is that there are pieces of this book that made their way, unfortunately, into the core of my psychology regarding sexuality. I think you put it well up front, Jacob. Like, we will all be laughing at this a lot. But the fact of the situation is that I reread the book today to prep for this. We had previously talked about Every Man's Battle, the Every Man's Battle extended universe, such as it is, on the Worst of All Possible Worlds a couple years ago. So I'd already read the book more recently, but then I went back today, and I felt that really bad feeling. And I had to go lie down and take a nap for 2
Yeah.
hours.
The
So
horror, H
I'm
capitalized.
it's bad. So I'm back, obviously. I'm awake, I'm alive, I'm excited to talk about this, but I also suffered tremendous, you can tell it's tremendous because I can't even say words correctly, psychic damage. And I'm excited to unpack that with all of you today.
Yeah, I must have been channeling a little bit of that psychic damage because yeah, I spent like a few hours this morning just like getting all my notes together and yeah, it just took me out for the afternoon. I
Yeah.
mean, it's December also, the seasons are weird. Um yeah, this is going to be another case of oh wow, like a demon stepped on my shadow because, like I didn't grow up in a like hardcore Christian environment, but like there's bits and pieces of like Christian media, Bible Man tape here and in Odyssey like thing there. Um
More Adventures in Odyssey as of late, though.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
my fault specifically.
Yes, but y'all are arming me to deal with it.
Oh,
Like,
sure.
you know,
With
To
back
be fair, Josh, I did like probably within 2 weeks of meeting Lenore, be like, "Hey, have you heard of this podcast, The Worst of All Possible World?" So it's also my fault.
yeah,
We get to share some blame there. But sorry,
I'll
yeah.
Lenore, go
I'll take
ahead.
I'll take the assist on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, like to have grown up like not even barely even adjacent to this media sphere, but aware of its tendrils here and there. It's wild to me going through this, not only because of the content, but because oh my God, there's an entire ecosystem that I grew up more or less unaware of that takes this stuff as gospel.
Yeah, and this stuff sells very well. It's very money making. It's not obviously it's a marginal ecosystem next to some things, but like, this book has sold over 1 million copies and several million copies cohesively worldwide if you count all the spinoffs and tie-ins. And one thing that was talked about a good amount on the Worst of All Possible Worlds episode is the film that tie in. And I do
Which I just found
recommend.
out about.
It
Yes,
is
yes.
so camp. And it all sort of centers around this young lad who is being given access to pornos by his friend. And there definitely feels to be some sort of a homoerotic relationship going on, either between those guys, definitely between the older man and the young men in his charge. He is
Mm.
very gay coded. It's something you just kind of need to see and hear for yourself.
It's phenomenal. And I saw that as well, but I do recommend people listen to that episode. We're going to be more book focused here, so I think while there will be crossover, I do think that
Hmm.
they're supplemental. And it's hard to know where to start here, but I think the best place to start this is just to talk about these authors. They talk a good amount about their own like lives and backstories and lore in this book.
There's some deep Des
Specifically,
Moines
Fred.
lore.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Lots going on here, especially with Fred. I'm gonna
Fred in the acknowledgments refers to his mother-in-law as a real gamer. I just wanted to point that
yeah.
out.
I noticed that.
So
Hmm.
cool. And if you really want to know these guys, they both have Instagram pages. Fred's is better. Fred is also more of the mastermind, I think, of this whole thing. Steve is like the technical guy. Steve is doing more of the production, the behind the scenes, the deals.
Mm.
Whereas Fred, like a lot of the like psychology that makes this specifically the way it is, if you listen to them talk, it is very much from Fred, as you'll see.
Yeah, there's one
Yeah,
part where we get some of Steve's backstory, and it's actually kind of interesting.
yeah,
Just to hear that the angle he's taking it from is a bit different, but the vast majority of this is just Fred. It's Fred all the way down. And the thing about Fred Stoeker is that once you've had an insight into his mind, once you've sort of lifted up that hood, there's no going back, baby.
yeah.
You're just gonna
He's
know
different.
he is actually built different, and not in a good way.
If you go to their Instagram pages, if you look at like Steve's, right? It's mostly like motivational quotes. It's there's definitely like you can tell it's conservative and Christian and all that versus links to podcasts he's been on and to his show and to his ministry. Some of it's about sexual purity, but it's a variety of things. Fred, I'm telling you, he's never posted anything that's not about porn, sexuality, whatever. And he's condemning it. And it's like the same like three hashtags. And like half of them are him driving in his car, like actively driving, reflective glasses on. So cool.
Which is especially wild once you've read this book. And like Josh Jacob was telling me about this earlier, he mentions like female joggers like 11 times in the
Yes,
concept of like things that are, in your environment tempting you.
that's right. In my edition, I did a search for jogger. I have an ebook edition, and I found 10 matches for the word jogger, which is 10 more than you'll find in the average book.
Which is wild to be fixated on, when your whole social media identity revolves around like driving in a car telling people about sexuality. Like presumably there's gonna be some like jogging temptresses like just out of frame.
That's true, but he's now immune because he spent 6 weeks not jacking off. He's got like over something like 30 videos that are just the same frame of him in the same white collared shirt that he posted back to back to back that he very clearly like filmed on just like in a manic episode. It's just he's a baffling guy. But to talk first about Steve, Steve Arterburn is like, much more on the technical side of this, much more on the deals, much more on the publishing connected. He is the pastor at Heartland Church in Indianapolis and the
Mhm.
chairman of New Life Ministries and the host of radio show New Life Live of New Life TV. And he's also the founder of the influential, quote, Women of Faith conferences. You might notice that you might ask, is Steve a woman? No, but he did found the Women of Faith
No, but his wife
conferences.
is.
No, his
And
wife sure is.
her name is Sheev.
No, it's not. I don't know. Yeah, it might be actually. I don't know what it is. Um, Steve is deeply involved in New Life, like I said, especially New Life Treatment Centers, which is Christian in and outpatient counseling centers that were like became big in like the late 90s. They've gone through like some weird phases. They used to be for profit, they became non-profit. They've like shifted around. There's all kinds of different stuff. Some of them have changed their names. Um, they vary. If you go to their website, they're like, we're faith-based. We're not going to push religion down your throat, but you will hear about people's spiritual whatever. We want people of all backgrounds. Um, to be clear, like they very much do things like gay conversion therapy and stuff
Sure.
like that. This stuff. You don't
Mm.
have to go for that. That's not exclusively what they do. But if you like read about like people who have actually gone and spent time some of it is pretty normal therapy or pretty normal, like God loves you, and then some of it can get like really heinous. There's definitely a deep dive to do there, but the New Life Ministries puts on the Every Young Man's Battle Sexual Addicts program, which is like you can have an in and outpatient thing for people like with porn addiction. Uh, and it was run, this stuck out by a guy named Joe Dallas. So I was like, God damn it, am
Uh-oh.
I related to this guy? Joe Dallas worth noting, left the program because he wanted to write a book called When Homosexuality Hits Home and host the quote, Christians and a Cancel Culture podcast. So, fellow
Oh,
Oh
podcaster.
boy.
hell yes.
I'm sure that's really good.
I hate it when homosexuality hits home. It's
when, when it hits home.
oh,
Um, so New Life
I love it when
Ministries.
homosexuality hits like a single or a double, but not when it
Yeah.
hits home. That's
Yeah, no, it's okay when it like, it does its one thing. Um, Steve, again, he works in a variety of fields. He works a lot with publishing. He was really helped establish their relationship with Waterbrook, which is a division of Random House. He also worked with Waterbrook in publishing the Tim Tebow books, interestingly enough.
oh,
Tim
okay.
Tebow wrote books?
I mean, ostensibly, I don't know how involved he was personally in the writing,
Oh
but
yeah.
maybe.
Waterbrook is basically you said it's Random House,
It's an imprint of Random House.
so it's kind of like what Zondervan is to HarperCollins.
It's a lot like that.
Okay.
Yes. Um, it's funny when you go to their website, this book shows up right next to the Garfield books. Like a Garfield compendiums or whatever. It says Every Young Man's Battle Garfield because they're both published, whatever, and for whatever reason the website structures it that way.
Do you
That was
think
kind
that
of
John
jarring.
Arbuckle ever fought Every Young Man's Battle?
I think he just like won it. It was so easy for him.
Well, now he's dating Liz, right? So like he doesn't have to fight it anymore.
Do you ever, shove in the hot? No, I don't have anything. Shove in the hot battle. No. It also worth noting, New Life Ministries is like pretty openly just like it is a huge cash cow. Like their chief dev officer that they got a few years ago is Wayne Nelson, a guy that's not really even involved in Christianity. He wrote The Disney Difference, Think Like a Donor, and Fundraising for Nonprofit Board Members. Like their whole board is all publishing people and people who are really good at like deals and book tours and seminars and tie-in books. Like this thing is actually like makes a significant amount of money. And I found even like to go to a 2.5 day seminar with Fred with Fred or Steve or one of their acolytes, it's like a 900 something dollar just seminar where he just repeats the points from this book to you.
How often?
Thinking-
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Lenore.
No, it's go ahead, go ahead. It was dumb.
Okay. How many seminars are they doing in a given like month, year, whatever these days?
It's fallen off at one point, like in the like 2008, 2009. It was like they were giving like several dozen a year. Now, like they're still like I counted like I think 11 last year. Like they still like
okay,
they
so roughly monthly.
yeah, it seems that way, but they also have like, these different imprint programs, and now they at individual churches have Every Young Man's Church like subgroups that then
Oh,
they bulk sell these books and workbooks
curriculum
to the
materials,
groups.
sure.
In fact, when you're trying to buy these books individually, a lot of times you'll like run into links for bulk buy because I think that's where they're doing like a significant amount of their sales. Um,
Yeah, the version I have has the workbook in the back. I didn't look through it.
and there's all kinds of like individual tie-ins that some of them have been successful, some of them haven't. They had their own Bibles for a while. There's all kinds of stuff going
Every Young Man's Bibles?
on. Yeah, Every Young Man's Bible.
I
But
need to. I'm going to look that up real quick because I'm very curious what translation the Every Young Man's Bible was.
it has to be an IV. I'm certain it's an IV. Um,
And New Living Translation.
New Living.
At
Okay,
least
never mind.
at least Every Man's Bible. I don't know if they had
Okay.
maybe they didn't have an Every Young Man's Bible. Maybe they just had Every Man's Bible.
Well, the Bible can get a little racy sometimes.
So true.
So maybe the young men. You might want to know also Steve Arterburn, heavily involved in Promise Keepers, works
Okay.
directly with Charlie Kirk and the New Right people.
Oh God!
Oh.
Really?
So So despite his presence being quite apolitical online, like you can scroll, like he's not making comments, he's making posts like no matter who wins the election, God's in control. This guy straight up has like worked with Charlie Kirk, works with the Promise Keepers, works with like New Right groups. Yeah, very much deeply involved and big supporter of like Focus on the Family, has worked with them
So he's
quite a
one of
bit.
the like smarter, like on the DL, like reactionaries.
It's a little bit like he's trying to do like a cultural thing on the side and be like semi-professional with the psychology stuff, be like this is actually real psychology that we're doing this, that, and the other. his groups have been involved in studies that are like proving homosexuality should be considered a mental disorder, things like that. So like,
There's
you
a
know, it's not
lot.
hard to tell where their opinions lie.
There's a
But
lot of statistics and conclusions and like quote unquote psychology in this book that's not cited at all. But like here and there, you can see. I mean, they straight up name check James Dobson at one
yeah,
point.
Right.
no, it has the same vibes of like sometimes when someone will just post an image that says, according to psychology, right? Like you can't just say that. But then there's Fred. Oh, I should also mention that Steve has written a lot of stuff, and one of those is a trilogy called the Sullivan Crisp trilogy, which features a psychologist hero. And their book is called Healing Stones, is the first one. Um, and he's been on like Oprah, CNN, USA Today. And he had a period in the early 2000s where he had like genuine cultural purchase and was seen like by some people as an expert on some of this stuff. Um, Fred, on the other hand, he talks about his story in the book, football, Stanford, obsessed with
That
sex.
guy cannot go more than like 2 minutes without talking about either Stanford or like Stanford Cardinal football specifically.
Mhm.
This is JD Vance and Yale. Like he went out for football. He didn't get into Stanford's team. He's made it all of our problem.
I know it's not the point, but the fact that he got a full ride to Yale and instead he decided to walk on at Stanford does not make any sense. Just practically, unless like the math was like very different back in the day, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me right now.
Maybe he just really, really wanted to play like top level college football and didn't just have a good sense of how he was relative to the competition.
Well, he had trained a lot running on ice for some reason, so he's good.
It's what you do in Iowa, I guess.
hmm Uh, and Fred, he has Living True Ministries, which is basically just like a Fred imprint, him and his wife. He's worked with Focus on the Family, has a two-part series with them, but his main thing is sex. Like scroll his feed, it's everything. He never talks like about anything else. It's the entirety of his focus. And I just recorded a few of the books he has or has co-authored here. This is not comprehensive, but you've got in 2000, Every Man's Battle, what really kicked this off. You've got Every Man's Marriage, Every Young Man's Battle, this one, Every Young Woman's Battle, which he technically isn't an author of, but like, yes, he is. Every Heart Restored, Preparing Your Son for Every Young Man's Battle, Every Man's Challenge, Tactics, Hero, Becoming the Man She Desires, Every Day for Every Man, Battle On, Battle Over, Every Woman's Desire, and The Healing Choice 1, The Healing Choice 2, and this I had missed until today. The Hunted, 2006, a novel by Fred Stoeker. Um,
Oh.
and this is from the back cover. Quote,
When one jogger
if
finds
only
herself
from the flesh pot temptations of Bangkok to the beautiful and terrifying environs of northern Thailand's vast wilderness areas, the boys find themselves tested at every turn. When separatist terrorists attempt to kidnap them in the wilderness, the four men are stranded deep in the jungle, pursued by gunmen toting AK-47s, and finally trapped in a cave with nowhere left to turn. If they hope to escape, they must face their deepest fears and put their lives and souls on the line. This book didn't sell very well. It has very little presence anywhere, but yeah,
On
it's
what
a
grounds?
book about
Yeah, God,
guys
that
going
sounds
to
great.
Bangkok. So that's cool, and I'm sure it's not racist at all.
No, probably not. What did you say it
No,
was called?
it is called The Hunted,
The Haunted.
2006. He co-wrote it with another guy, I forget who. But
It
there's
was on
all
the
these
list.
books.
Would it happen to be Mike Yorkie?
I don't know who the other guy is. I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Did the name Mike Yorkie come up when you were looking at Every Young Man's Battle?
Mike
He's like the
Yorkie.
editor, right?
This-
Yeah, I
He's
think
being credited as a co-author.
yeah, he's the
on it.
editor. That guy's the editor, I believe.
This guy also has some banger books. I'm
Oh
looking
yeah.
at. He has my personal favorite I found so far is Unglued and Tattooed: How to Save
Ooh.
Your Teen from Raves, Ritalin, Goth, Body Carving, GHB, Sex, and 12 other emerging threats, and it has the worst. It has the worst reviews of any book I've ever seen, mostly from Christians.
They hated him because he told the truth.
So true. The co-author of The Hunted I'm seeing was a guy known as D.W. Smith. Who even knows if that's a real person? That sure sounds like a fake name to me. But that was published on Random House's like imprint. Like it was a Random House book.
Unbelievable. But that's how much money like Fred was making. That's how
Right.
much he was bringing in. And like, he's still publishing stuff. He's fallen off greatly. But like in 2004, I think he had 4 books come out. And all of these were selling hundreds of thousands of copies. And they were selling, tie-in films. And he was getting to do talks. And like and. It goes on.
So
These
now,
books
I mean,
were
he
everywhere
since,
where
since
I grew
then
up.
he's just been fretting out.
Yeah.
He's just been fretting out. But yeah, no, this stuff was everywhere when I was, growing up. Like I said, Every Young Man's Battle specifically was taught in my school, which was, not great. And I know Every Young Woman's Battle was taught at least in some of the women's Bibles classes. Because this book is Every Young Man's Battle, obviously we're going to be focusing on like the men's side a lot, but I just want to note this is from a classmate of mine back in high school. We went to the same Christian high school, and they shared their experience as a female passing person in our high school at the time, being trained on Every Young Woman's Battle and the curriculum around it. They responded actually to a post we put out about this. Because I said this was taught in our class in some absurd quote, and they've said, meanwhile, in the girls' class, we were taught that sex is supposed to be painful for women because, quote, you need blood to seal a covenant, end quote, and signing a, quote, marriage and name change certificate, end quote, that married us to Jesus, shitty bubblegum machine ring included. So that's like kind of a taste on the other side. So the whole time we are talking about this, I mean, we will note their sexism on multiple occasions, but it's worth noting there is this entire women's side of the curriculum that is teaching basically like they should like revel in being put through pain and or basically property. So, worth keeping in mind. Pretty horrifying shit.
Yeah, there's some bizarre reactions because there are women quoted in this book, Every Young Man's Battle, right? And there's some bizarre reactions to like, women finding out that, oh, their partners like masturbate or, this or that, and they're shocked and they're horrified to the point of like breaking off the engagement or the relationship or whatever. So like to have that extra context of, okay, like they're raised to view this thing as like ontologically like creepingly evil is that puts it a little bit in perspective.
Right. Yeah. No, it is this idea that the sort of impulse of, I don't know, call it lust if you want, as they do biblically, but really just being horny, right? That impulse is somehow inherently sinful. That is core to what this ideology is. And it's not about what you do with that impulse. It's not about how you apply it. It's not about, what you may or may not want either for yourself or, what you may or may not have agreed upon with a partner or whatever. It's just the only acceptable place for any of this is within the confines of a loving marriage between one man and one woman. And anything outside of that ever is the worst thing you could possibly do.
And it's worth noting that they're shocked too, and like aghast when inside the confines of the marriage, people bring the shame and guilt from before into it. Like it's supposed to be great once you're in it. And basically this book's stance on that is, oh wow, tough if that's what happens to you. I will note that I've been on a sort of for some reason scrolling and watching Fred's Instagram videos
Hi,
today.
this is Fred, and what is the thing that he says?
Drive-bys with Fred.
This is drive-bys with Fred. This
Does
is
he know what
Fred, and
drive-bys
I'm
are?
driving by. Does anybody
Does he
want to
know
do a
what-
drive-by with Fred? All right, here's a drive-by with Fred.
Well, he also
Fred,
doesn't
and
know
I'm
what a
doing a
player is.
drive-by.
He doesn't know what a drive-by, like just Imagine drive by with Fred. But no, one thing he notes is he says, it's been brought to my attention, this is a few months ago, that in the modern day and age, it's not just men, women are now looking at pornography.
It's
And
true.
he
They
says,
didn't used to do that.
no, that's literally what he says. He says now a generation, 2 generations ago, this would have been unimaginable, but due to the sort of degeneration of culture, but also because pornographers now know what women like and are appealing to them.
Mm.
And if you want to know what the pornographers are doing to appeal to women, you're going to need to read my wife's newest book. So
But
I don't know
but hold
what
on,
his
hold
wife
on one moment.
unveils.
I was under the understanding, right, the impression that women don't get attracted to things simply because of what they see.
Yeah,
I was reliably informed by Fred Stoeker
Mhm.
that women don't, that just doesn't happen.
We're not visual creatures.
Right.
I don't know. Fred says here, I think Fred has shifted because now his wife has written a book and he wants to make more money. But I was
Mm.
taught on this book that women are not attracted at all to anything they see, which obviously led a lot of women to feel bad because they had attraction to things they
Mhm.
seen, and a lot of men to be like, wow, that sucks. I would like a woman to be attracted to me. I
Yeah.
guess I'll go jump off a cliff.
Guess
You
I'll
know,
go die now.
yeah. Or, you could be, or it also says, men don't feel like the same emotional attachment as women. So a bunch of men are like, well, I guess I'm broken because I'm like, romantically interested in my girlfriend. You know what I mean? Like, and don't get me started if, you're like me. We get a few pages at the end.
Yeah, you catch a couple strays right
I
at
was-
the end.
I was going to ask, like, there's the bit at the end. There's one chapter at the end of this about homosexuality
Right.
that's weirdly divorced from like the rest of the book. Like you could cut it out and more or less not lose. I say as if there's any like narrative value to it. But, like, was that part of
No,
it
it's
from the beginning?
important. It's really important.
It's
It's
actually the
really
best
good.
part.
Yeah, no, yeah. Fred said one for the fags for sure.
I don't, well, that's the thing is, I don't think that one was Fred. That one feels very Steve to me.
Yes, it
The writing
does.
style is very, very different.
Yeah,
I,
I think even an analysis of it might have come out of your childhood is definitely not Fred. Fred would have been like, it's porn. It
Right.
happened because of porn, which actually that does get referenced in the book too. There's a guy that watched so much porn he turned gay.
I hate it when that happens.
and if you watch
I-
enough porn, you might turn into a woman.
Yes,
That's-
also true.
That's true. Imagine
So
telling
true.
tell Fred about Sissy Hypno and watch him
Uh-huh.
just implode.
He says sissy like 5 times over the course of the book. So
And clearly doesn't know like what it means even in the original context because he's describing a guy who refuses to surrender. It's like, why did never mind. But like, we'll bring it back to the beginning. I've talked a lot. Lenore or Josh, do one of y'all want to frame up how we kind of start up this romp into truth and mental and spiritual healing?
The foreword is mystifying to me because he talks about, okay, yeah, being part of this series has been one of the great joys of my life, writing these everyman books, illuminating the fraught landscape of human sexuality and, the satanic influences therein. And there's a whole bunch of quotes here from men who are like, thank you, you saved my marriage. Like, we would not still be married if not for this book. Right. And I'm reading
That's so
this.
bleak.
Yeah, literally, like, where do you have to be in your marriage that making the verbal commitments to not masturbating anymore is the factor that saves it? In particular, like, okay, so right here, this hit the ground running for me. One of my favorite stories is of a husband who came because his wife demanded it. Kinky. After the conference, he confessed his
demand,
affair. Yeah, right. It's a skill. He was truly repentant and said he would do anything to make it up to her. She asked him to sign over all property and assets to her because the name on them wouldn't matter if he was truly finished with his lust and adultery. She asked him to shave his chest, and she asked him to get braces on his teeth. He did all 3 because he realized his actions had humiliated her, on and on and on and on. So, like, signing over all your property, like dental work, like, A, you're in a position to be able to afford to do this, but B, like, this is a bizarre thing to predicate a relationship
that
on.
doesn't sound healthy. And I'm not saying that this guy might not have done some shit. He probably did. But this doesn't sound to me like a healthy way to kind of ground those things and come closer to a lasting remedy.
Well, but that's the thing of it though, right? There's such a flattening of experience when it comes to sexual impropriety, from, just like sexual curiosity to like straight up sex crimes like recounted in these books here.
Yes.
But it's all flattened at the end of the forward here. It doesn't really matter what you've done, it's no worse than what others have done, right? The whole
It's like
paradigm.
sometimes it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the whole paradigm of like avoiding sexual impurity, like it leads to this ambiguity that catches up like legit like bad shit with just like misunderstandings.
Mhm.
Did your version of the book include a foreword from a band called Stereo Motion?
Mine did, yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I think there are different versions of this book that have different stuff in them. The version that I have actually kicks off with this foreword. Like I said, it's a band called Stereo Motion. This is some Christian contemporary band. I went and I was able to find exactly one of their songs on SoulSeek. It was the worst song I've ever heard. And I just would like to read, again, this isn't funny. I want to be very clear. This is not funny, but it is representative, I think, of a lot of what this book is like. And this is part of like a good example of why I had to lie down for 2 hours. So they're talking about how, what does it mean to be pure, guys? What is that? We're teens. We're like you. How do you do, fellow teens? We're the band Stereo Motion. We're painfully aware of some of the extreme consequences that can result from violating God's commandment to lead a sexually pure life. When Brian was 9 years old, his father died of AIDS. Whether he acquired the disease from his lifestyle of sexual promiscuity with women, or from his drug use, or if he spread it to others through sexual encounters, we will never know. What we do know is that his impure living cost him his life, and only God's protected hand preserved Brian, his sister, and his mom. Years later, Brian is drawing from the painful lessons he's learned to help steer his peers away from the paths his dad took and to point them toward God's straight and narrow path.
So it's weird to me that like from this like reactionary perspective on AIDS, it's weird to me that they don't blame it on like homosexuality, right? Like they say, okay, sex with women, drug use, maybe he spread it to others. They don't once bring up the specter unless you're supposed to like read between the lines.
Oh, no,
like,
I think they're just trying to be like, his dad wasn't gay, by the way, just so you know.
okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's also like scaring you, like AIDS. It's not just for gay
Not just for
boys
gay men anymore. Yeah.
Right. No,
Aha.
it's basically starting off by like, flossing on this guy's grave. Being like, yep, yeah, AIDS. Yeah, it really like it comes out swinging. And then
Mhm.
it's interesting because you get this intro from, the intro from Fred is whatever. He calls his mother-in-law gamer. Um,
He calls his mother-in-law a gamer and he calls his wife a warrior, which like evangelical and like right-wing folks like calling women warriors has never sat well with me because like they're always like shield maidens on behalf of some man, like never for in their own right.
well, you remember what Santa Claus said in Narnia, Lenore. When women have to fight in war, it's an ugly thing.
So true.
That's true. That's true.
Santa
note that down.
Claus. I love that C.S. Lewis had Santa Claus look at the girls and say, "This isn't for you," and then have the sword appear in really great behavior. No, but the intro from Stephen Arterburn, which, like I've said, he's the more, he's not normal, but he's a more level guy. He's coming at this from a a therapist-like point of view. It's not a correct point of view, but and he says, we have to break the sexual code of silence. The code states that it's okay to joke about sex or even lie about it, but other than that, it's your solemn duty as a male to keep silent whenever a serious discussion about sex takes place. And then in a minute later, a few paragraphs, he says, you're a sexual being and deserve to know what's right and true about your sexuality so you can have the greatest chance possible for a fantastic sexual relationship with the person you marry. And I remember being, maybe 11, 12, reading this and being like really like encouraged at this beginning point. Cause I was like, oh, like actually, like this is something I want to think and talk about. This is something that I'm dealing with. There is this code of silence, right? I didn't have words like patriarchy to describe the reasons that there are these things. And then I was like, oh, this guy gets it, and he's gonna explain and like come at it with a way that's not shameful to me. And
Yeah.
he says all the time he's not gonna be shameful, and then he makes you feel like absolute shit.
There's also in here too. There was a moment that hit me where it was like he's just talking about how like a friend of his son just like was very open with him and was just like was talking about how he was feeling regarding his hormones and everything. And he says the young boy then did a very courageous thing. He approached his father and said, "Dad, I just feel like taking off my clothes and standing in front of a girl naked." And I'm like, heard, chef. Like that is so real in a way that I feel like the rest of this book just isn't. Like that is approaching that impulse from a place of no judgment whatsoever. But the rest of the book simply doesn't do that. I'm also curious, Jacob, like at that point, were you already like realizing that girls weren't so much the play for you, or like was that not in the gestalt for you yet?
Yes, I had realized that at that point when I took up wrestling as a
Oh,
fifth
sure.
grader. I
Yeah.
think that's probably when I could first identify it. But like at that point I was like, books like this had kind of said, oh, it'll all work out. And
Right.
even throws out something in here that it's like your hormones, whatever, and they're gonna stabilize. So I kind of figured that was gonna happen. Um, and so I didn't have any like words for it. I certainly hadn't told anybody.
Right.
Um, and why would I? Because I would be sent to one of the New Life ministries,
Right.
inpatient facilities.
And what's interesting too is that in my experience, at
Potentially.
least in sort of the evangelical environment, sort of, I don't know, call it like childhood sexual experimentation, I guess, like the kind of
Yeah.
shit that you do when you're a kid and you don't really understand what your body is yet,
Yeah.
but you're still seeing like, oh, what does your body look like? What does my body look like? What happens when I touch this part of your body, right? When that happens between boys or between girls, that is not considered to be deviancy, and it's not, right? Like it's that's just a normal part of psychological development. But the moment that it becomes a boy doing it with a girl, then it's the worst thing you
Yeah.
could ever possibly imagine.
Because like guys in the locker room are constantly grabbing each other's
Oh,
ass and
yeah.
like, to like a much higher age. And sometimes that turns into like some inappropriate, like, imbalance of power. But like
Right.
when you're young, a lot of that is just like, haha, wouldn't it be funny if I like felt that there?
Right.
And it's
And-
like that's heavily ingrained in locker room culture for like a reason. And
Or
that's
like
seen as like
sleepovers, right? Like
know?
everybody's got a story about something they did at
Yeah.
a sleepover one time,
100%.
right?
100%. And it then says in this intro as well, one of the most difficult assignments you'll ever have is to integrate your sexuality with the emotional, spiritual, social, and relational person you want to be. Many have the tendency to see their sexuality as something shamefully separate and distinct from themselves, but that shouldn't be the case at all. Once again, like that's really like sounds really good. And that's why like I was saying at the beginning, these guys don't come out swinging with like the new right stuff, even though they're aligned with it. These guys don't like, I mean, the AIDS thing lets on, right? But these
Yeah.
guys don't, this kind of intro is very like, we're gonna, talk and, this is a therapist environment and it's all good and whatever, but it is aligned with this greater project. And when you look at these organizations that they're part of, a lot of them are connected to other organizations that worked on things like Project 2025. Like if the email comes in before we publish the episode, I will like accord an addendum to add to this. I sent an email to Fred Stoeker asking his opinions on Project 2025 and worded it like in a truth way. I didn't lie to him. I said I've been reading you since I was young. That's true. But like maybe he'll respond, maybe he won't. But like we know how they feel about this shit.
Right.
I just wanted a quote. But they don't. The interesting thing is that they don't. Like their social medias don't say that stuff. But we know where they're at. And it's like to kind of make this feel apolitical and scientific. And it's actually really like scary and damaging and works in hand with some of the more like radical shit they're aligned with.
Well, I think a piece of it too is that they believe, I think, this to be apolitical. I really
for
do.
sure.
You have to think about it from the mindset of the person doing it. We, of course, see this as one brick in a much larger project.
Yeah.
And the alignment of these forces, when you talk about something like Focus on the Family or whatever, right? Their political project is part and parcel of the broader project of control and Christian dominionism. But the way that they see it is, well, we're just trying to teach people how to live a moral and upright life.
Yeah.
And over here, we're also working on a project of Christian control of every aspect of the government. But both of those things are in pursuit of making the world a more moral place.
Right.
There
And books like,
is
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, and there is some rhetorical assonance here, right? Between like, oh, the Israelites cleansed every like impure thing from their kingdom, or tried to. They failed, and that's why their kingdom fell. So they say, right? And like it's because they embarking on this project to cleanse every like sinful, every like heterodox influence. From your sphere of experience is part and parcel of becoming a more moral person, and you can really see between that and like the idea of settler colonialism, support for like U.S. imperialism, like making sure walking in lockstep with there not being a pure competitor to American hegemony. Like you can see a lot of overlap within those concepts rhetorically.
Well, sure. And also, like, you have things in this, like just the built-in assumption that the world is against Christians and that the world is against, your purity. It throws this out like it's, commonly received, wisdom, which then inspires the other stuff. Like it throws out, like, we all know the world has gotten more and more hostile to young men and is getting more and more sexual. And it's like, not necessarily like that there's certain aspects of that you can whatever, like they had proliferation of internet porn obviously as a thing because the internet exists, but like the idea of like every Hollywood movie these days, like, no, actually not.
Especially
Hollywood,
not compared to the 80s. I mean,
yeah, like holy cow.
if you want to tell me that movies like around the turn of the millennium were more sexual than your average like PG rated movie in 1984, no, I don't think so, guy. I don't think
And
so.
he still says that now. Like he was like his
It's
videos.
even less sexual now.
Yeah,
What are you
his
talking about?
he like literally has videos where he's like all these like sexy superheroes, and I'm like, the Marvel would never like
Does he say that when he's doing a drive-by?
It wasn't a drive by, but
Oh,
it
okay.
was him at his desk, wearing a collared shirt, looking
Like
very red.
in 1980, like you can go down to Blockbuster and rent Airplane, that's PG, and there's tits in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
One of my
But
favorite movies of all time, and it's not just for the tits, but the tits
yeah,
certainly don't hurt, folks.
and Forrest, never forget Forrest Gump.
Fred can't.
No. And speaking of Fred, I like right after the intro, we have ready to get started. We're going to begin by letting Fred tell you his story. And as
Mm.
we say in Texas, it's a humdinger.
Oh,
I'm
it's a home
I'm
dinger.
I'm
And I
from
wrote a note.
Arlington.
I wrote a note down that just said "real freak alert." Like, and
Yeah,
here we go.
like I'm from Arlington. My whole mother's side of the family is from Texas. I've never heard anybody IRL use the word humdinger.
No, that well, they say it a lot, Lenore.
In
It's just, you
Texas.
you got to know in Texas, just different part of Texas than you were in.
No, it's
Must-
the part
it's-
of
it's a-
Texas where all my exes are. That's
It's
where
a
they say it.
It's that part.
it's a big state.
All of
Yeah.
Fred's exes, which is like half the United States population, if he is to be believed.
And they all jog.
Yeah, I would like to talk at some point. Like I think it'll organically come up a little later on. But I think that Fred is an unreliable narrator. And I'll be very interested to talk a bit more about that once we get to those pieces of his autobiography.
He frequently
have
Freds
r-
out, yes.
Right at the top, the Fred introduces and says the chapter is called "When Football Was King."
Mm.
Which, like, also they don't capitalize anything in these chapter titles. Kind of a weird choice. Um, Growing up amid the Iowan cornfields, I made football my god. The sport dominated everything about me, and I happily played and practiced year round. I even liked two-a-days in hot, muggy August.
What's a
Well,
2 a day? Do you know? I
two
don't know.
practices a day, and
Oh, okay. It's like
that's
it's like a
actually
2 show day in the American theater. I only
Mm.
understand
it's a
things
lot.
in theater terminology because I'm a theater kid, and
Yeah.
I don't know anything about sports ball.
They do 2 rehearsals a day, so they can do their performance on Friday.
Oh,
Yeah.
got it. Okay.
Yeah. Also, that's loser shit. We had 3 days in August when I played
Get
football, but
good,
whatever.
kid.
We literally did the camp from like Remember the Titans, like
That's awesome.
self-consciously. In hot, muggy August. Football was such a big part of my life that I let the noble sport dictate what I did off the field. After the games, I never joined my teammates at Lake McBride for the kegger parties. Drinking beer, I believe, would weaken my focus and soften my drive. As for girlfriends, I viewed them as high maintenance commitments that would distract me from my goal, becoming an all-state quarterback. Like any red-blooded football player, however, I had more than a passing interest in sex. I had been hooked on Playboy centerfolds ever since I found a stack of the magazines beneath my dad's bed. When I was in first grade, I also
Da,
discovered
da, 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 da,
copies
da.
of From Sex to Sexty, a publication filled with naughty jokes and sexy comic strips. Really quick, I looked up Sex to Sexty. Are y'all
Yeah.
familiar with this?
I mean, I'm picturing what it is in my head, and I think I have a good picture of what it is.
It's so fucking funny. So I looked it up and like it is so like of its era. I looked it up and like the first page, it's just like lewd drawings. And I say like lewd because like I can't even call them sexy drawings because they're not, and they're
Yeah,
not really meant to be.
Is it just like some girl who's got like a skirt and it's like flying up and you can sort of see her ass, and then there's a guy who's got the eyes going like "Auga" and shit like that?
Essentially, literally, and it's just a bunch of like little stories that are funny and then just like throwaway quotes.
Okay.
From the front page, there's an art of a guy trying to play poker saying, I can lick anybody in the house. And a bunch of women are smirking at him.
Okay.
That's it. And
Do they have their
just
pussies out, or is it
no,
not?
they're just
Oh, okay.
smirking because he said he can lick anybody in the house
Okay, okay.
and they're horny. And then it just
Come
there's
on.
no art with this. It just says, pity the tattooed lady's husband. He was smothered to death trying to read between the covers.
Oh, I found some art.
Oh, this is horrible. Why did you show this to me, Lenore?
What I have put in the chat is How Now Sex to Sexty number 34 from 1971. The cover of this volume has a bull. He's like hunched over this cow who's on her back. He's sucking on her udder, and the cow just looks blissed out.
This is a horrible thing.
And then the last one I wrote down, and they've got a little art of Little Red Riding Hood looking a little horny. Says, when the big bad wolf threatened to gobble her up, Red Riding Hood said, doesn't anyone go for just plain sex nowadays?
Dun-dun.
So this is what like led Fred. Fred read this and he jacked off 30 times
When he was
before
in first grade.
he lost his mind. So again, this is like the beginning of his lore. And Fred is, I like that the immediate go from the intro of like, we're all different. We've got our sexuality. We're going to work on it, whatever. We're going to work together. And then Fred said, like any red-blooded football player, I was like, okay, so you immediately are like falling into this. Like if there was any indication that there was going to be this sensitivity to different types of people or whatever, he immediately off the bat was like just swinging for the fences.
Well,
with
I mean,
this shit.
I don't think that he's one of those people who I get the sense literally cannot conceive of any other way of existing. You know what I mean?
Probably not. And yeah, it just goes on about, his dad divorced his mom, had a bachelor pad with a nude in the living room. He goes to college and he just immediately is like, realizes he's not cut out for football. So we have, he was in high school. He doesn't cut it at the highest level in college. So it says there was no way he could compete. When my football dreams died that afternoon, I turned my attention to ... women. Pictures of naked women.
Let's go.
Am I right, brother? Like,
Yeah, this is Hitler in art school. For want of a nail, like he becomes a porn fiend.
Yeah, well, I think there's something interesting too about how he sort of hand waves a lot of stuff about his dad here, but then later on in the book, he sort of goes into more detail about how big of a piece of shit his dad is.
No, his dad is
God,
bad.
yeah.
And that's like the one thing where I sort of felt real sympathy for him. And I was like, oh wow, like you are this close to self-awareness that like all of these, not all of these, but that some of these big psychological complexes you have are things that you can trace directly back to your lack of a solid father figure in your life and your desire to gain some semblance of control back. And it makes sense that if that's like hardwired into your neurosis, that you might end up falling into a series of unhealthy relationships.
It
Yes.
does explain the bits and pieces here where he's like, yeah, this person told me about this, like the median sexual experience for a red-blooded American man growing up, and it's something horrific, right? Like a guy talks to a receptionist and then has to like fight the temptation not to jerk off in his car after. It's like,
Yeah, that's
okay,
Fred.
like
That Fred talks about like doing that. There's
No,
a part there's a part where he's like, and all these secretaries, what with their blouses and their boobs are popping out all over the place.
No, Fred lives in like the Brazzers universe. Like,
right.
he is experiencing things no one has ever
And like
experienced
if
before.
your baseline, as with Fred, is okay, your dad tried to set you up with a prostitute when you were 14,
Yeah.
then yeah, your perspective on this would be kind of skewed.
That's some wild fucking business. I mean, it makes me think about if you've ever read Bob Fosse's biography. He grew up around a bunch of chorus girls because he was like doing the vaudeville circuit from a very young age, and those girls abused him sexually when he was still like a prepubescent boy. And it had long-term effects on, again, his ability to establish lasting, meaningful relationships. Developing attachment when you have been traumatized at a young age is very difficult, especially when the attempts to sort of paper over that loss are really craven things like, son, you're becoming a man tonight. I've hired a prostitute. You know, it's really fucked up.
And then the idea that, like, you know, instead of being like, okay, I have this specific relationship to sexuality that comes from my own experiences, I'm instead going to tell, you know, millions of people that this is the baseline.
Right.
And I am now an authority figure that you should listen to. And that so many people in institutions, again, including where I come from, were like, that's the guy. And everybody gather up and listen to him. And that, like, it seems that at no point there at this process, anyone was like, hey, maybe this isn't the guy to talk to kids about sex. Like, maybe this guy still has his own shit that he hasn't acknowledged. Like, maybe he's messed up from the thing with his dad and his dad shoving porn down his throat, it seems like, and his dad like calling him gay in a derogatory sense for having friends.
I mean,
like,
you have to wonder, and again, I'm not saying that any of this is certainly the case, but it does make you wonder if there are other pieces of that relationship where he is leaving out details, that this might be an even darker thing than what he is establishing. I wouldn't be surprised. Let me put it that way.
No doubt.
And you know, the thing is too, he just then is like, okay, in this very first chapter, I just want to read again. He is doing this as an example of like, and if you ever jack off to a jogger, you know, you're going to end up just like me. You're going to be this guy. And he says, within 12 short months, I'd gone from being able to say no in a secluded camper on a moonlit night to being able to say yes in any bed on any night. Just 1 year out of college in California, I found myself with 4 steady girlfriends. Simultaneously, I was sleeping with 3 of them and was essentially married to engaged to 2 of them. None of them knew the others. What?
Within a chapter 2, he calls himself Joe Stud.
And here again, I'm like, okay, I genuinely can't tell if this is true, but he is sort of framing it up in a sort of incorrect way, right? Like an intellectually dishonest way, so as to draw attention from the reader. Or maybe it's embellishing like the truth, like maybe it was actually just one girl who was regular hooking up with, and then the other 3 were just like every once in a blue moon. But he's like, yeah, and I was going to get married to 2 of them. Who can say? And it doesn't really matter. The only point that I have here is that it's fucking weird.
I also like that, like, what finally draws him into like full, you know, sleeping around is he just encounters a female referee who looks like a grown-up version of his childhood sweetheart, and they instantly fuck.
God.
And it's just like, you, again, he apparently lives in like the Pornhub universe.
Right.
That, like, you're just running into these situations all the time. And just like, you know, there's just, you know, stepsisters getting caught in fucking dryers everywhere. Like, well, this is it's
Fred Stoeker.
I don't know whether he just had an insane amount of riz, whether he's lying. I don't know what's happening. He's definitely bragging though.
Oh,
like,
yes.
it cannot be stressed enough that, like, no matter how much he's like, oh, my dark past, like he clearly wants you to know, like, dude, I could fuck.
Yep.
Like he wants you to know that. That is very important to him. And
Yes.
sometimes it gets like low key, like almost soft core, like
Yes.
levels of like
There's some really horny extracts in this
like I
text.
said, there were guys I know that I went to high school with that said straight up, and these were like, very Christian guys who were trying to live these principles, who told me, they didn't tell me they were jacking off to this, but they said like, dude, there were some passages in this that made me like feel sinful to read. And I'm like, yeah, because he wrote, quote, I still remember the short, full-bodied Asian girl standing nude in a wheat field. I can see the nude Playboy model cloaked in clear plastic raincoat as the shower cascaded over her. Every detail, from the color and cut of her hairstyle right down to the curvature of her spreading thighs, are imprinted on my brain. That's really fucking horny. Like,
It is.
that's more explicit than these books usually get, at least when they're being literal about sex. Obviously, you have Ted Dekker-esque scenes about swallowing bombs, but
Right.
that's a whole nother episode.
Well, Ted Dekker saves his horny descriptions for when he's talking about a woman who is definitely not his daughter.
Woo! But yeah, no, it's wild. And Fred has his whole thing. He feels disgusted with himself while he's working a corporate job. He doesn't say what it is, but he is a
Yep.
consultant, probably more evil than anything else he's
An
done in this
investment
book.
advisor of some description in San Francisco. Like, so he's doing well for himself.
Oh,
He-
yeah. I mean,
He's done something evil.
that's something else that I did want to point up for just a moment is that he doesn't seem to be aware of how insane his class privilege is.
100%.
There's a part here where he's talking about how, like, after the office job, he's like, okay, it was time to move on, right? I'm not gonna hork it I'm no longer jorking it. I'm a new man now. And he says, but it wasn't the new life ahead of me that would transform me. It was a new life in me. Though I still didn't know it for sure, an event on my trip home to Iowa revealed that God had moved in. I stopped in Steamboat Springs, Colorado to visit a couple of Stanford buddies. The father of one owned a ranch just outside Steamboat. And so I was looking forward to grabbing a few days of relaxation and Rocky Mountain High as I passed through. Yeah, I just casually went to Stanford, and then I went to fucking Steamboat Springs, where my friend's dad has a fucking ranch. Like, come on, dude.
Now, God is a lot like a ranch owner.
Mm,
we heard at the top of the episode.
that's true.
Swinging his lariat.
And that was when that is when he saw like a Playboy spread and he was like, this one doesn't do it for me. And then he goes, thanks, God. He gets real
Yeah.
excited. And then he, tries to have sex and God keeps him from getting hard.
That's
And
true.
he said, me, Joe Stud.
Let's see. Here
I
it
hate
is.
this guy.
So the story of how God cockblocks him here is intriguing to me. I don't know when exactly this takes place.
This is after he gets home because he's left San Francisco on a whim.
But he's in his like late 20s, right? So what is this, like 90s or so? Like
He's
I don't
moved
know.
back to Iowa full time.
Yeah, and he tracks down. This is what he says. In no time, thoughts of Janet began to swirl in my imagination. She was
Damn
an
it,
old
Janet.
She was an old friend from high school, and I've been enamored with her for years. Back then, I'd been too busy with football to start a relationship with her, but I'd often dreamed of sleeping with her. I soon tracked her down, and what luck! She was still single and living in Omaha. So he calls her, and like, this is interesting to me. Like, he's settled into an apartment in Ankeny, Iowa, which is a suburb of Des Moines. It's just, I looked at this is 2 hours away from Omaha. Maybe I'm spoiled by technology, but I'm curious about how exactly he went about tracking her down, A, and how he framed it, B, when he called her up out of the blue.
Those are great questions.
Well, you see, he ended up on this castle where Janet was also staying. She said something along the lines of touch me, I want to
Right.
feel dirty. You
Want
get
to
it.
feel dirty.
Yeah, Fred is Rocky from Rocky Horror. He would have us believe that, actually. He
No,
would
but-
have us believe that he is Rocky from Rocky Horror. I
It's-
think he's the kind of guy that sees a movie and thinks he lived it in real life.
Yeah, but again, it's another thing. One of those examples of like, what is this story fully true? If it is, what are we not being told? Because at face value, you're right, Lenore. This is weird.
I mean, it would certainly explain the part where he talks to a guy and then the shit happens bumper sticker comes out.
Mm. I think that also it's like, is he also like looking back at points in his life and like retconning? Like there was a
Right.
time I couldn't get hard. God did that. This fits into my broader
Yes.
narrative, right?
There is there's so sorry to cut you off, like, but
No, you're not.
there is so much of that shot through this, so much of like making this whole like cosmology, like this psychology make sense, is like looking back at your life and overlaying a narrative
Hmm.
on otherwise disparate points, right? He's literally setting up dominoes and tipping over a small one that says cheated on a math test, and the big one reads had my girlfriend get an abortion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The girlfriend getting
Well,
the
that
abortion, that was Steve.
yeah, that one is
Oh
Steve.
shoot, you're right.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I can even read, if you want, I can read when he got 2D2F. One
Yes.
thing led to another, and we slipped out of our clothes and slipped into her bed. Nice one, Fred. We began kissing, but a strange thing happened. I couldn't get an erection.
Mer, mer,
That
mer.
had never happened before. Jesus Christ, man.
It was a
Let me tell you something, folks. When it came to sustaining an erection, I was so good at it. Uh, deeply
He'd actually never been
humiliated.
soft before.
Deeply humiliated, my head spinning, I slunk out to the parking lot and slumped into my car. Nice parallel construction there.
Mhm.
Then I clearly heard the spirit whisper into my heart. Whisper into my heart? By the way, I did that to you. I know it hurt you, but this practice can't be tolerated anymore in your life. You are Christ's now, and he loves you.
If he really loved him, he'd make him get it up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Come on.
I think, and it's also, I remember, okay, so, not to make this about me, but I remember reading this book and being like, okay, so God does intervene sometimes when you ask him to, when it comes to sex. So if I pray to God and then follow the rules in this book, he'll fix the other sex problems I have, like being
Mm,
attracted to men. Because
sure.
obviously, I'll do the 6 week thing. I'll do the whatever. In fact, didn't look at porn at all when I was a kid. Like literally at all. I had very strict internet access and I genuinely believed this stuff and whatever. It didn't work because it just doesn't work like that. And obviously he's being dishonest, but there are so many people reading this and looking to this for guidance, and it like fundamentally shapes the way people feel and think about themselves and their like relationships. It did for me at the very least.
Because now you're like hyper aware of every sexual experience you
Yeah.
have and how it could possibly relate to you not being right with God.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Well, to the point of another thing that was. This is what I remember from this book. This is the big thing that shaped me, and I know because I have like old journal entries that I wrote as a teenager that are like wrangling with this.
Yeah.
The temptation, so this is starting by being like, hey, being attracted to girls, that's normal. And then he says the temptation, however, is to fulfill these desires and attractions in a wrong way and to go beyond a natural and normal outlook. That means viewing a girl more as an extremely interesting collection of body parts rather than as a precious child of God. We refuse to believe you don't know the difference. You know when you're thinking about her mostly as a pair of breasts walking by and little else. And I can pull up old journal entries. I don't have them on this computer, they're on another computer, but where I'm like writing fervently about how, oh God, like I looked at that girl and I looked at her boobs and
Mhm.
I thought she was hot. And that means that I'm not seeing her as a child of God. It means that I'm just being a fucking deviant. Not knowing, of
Mhm.
course, that the real deviant here is Fred Stoeker, who's like trying
More
to.
like Fred Stoeker.
That's so true. Like who's taking all of his weird fucking neuroses and complexes and making them my problem. You know what I mean?
Yes, and it leads to, yeah, you're like trying to figure out. He's like, it says I refuse to. Let's say the difference, but it's like also like there are rare moments where it'll refer to a woman as like a child of God that you should see her as, but
Yeah.
it only does that when it is shaming you for feeling attracted to her, right? Like when Fred leaves all these women behind, right? After, to go on like self-actualization, when he abandons his essentially two fiancées, if we are to believe his story, they are never mentioned or considered again, right? Their
Yeah.
feelings, nothing about it.
Are
Like
they
it
not
doesn't talk
also
about
children of God? I mean, or is it
right.
just that because, they were also the fucking sirens who were tempting him, right? These wanton Jezebels, are they not also worthy of similar consideration?
Exactly. The only time women are given like humanity and it's
Hmm.
like is like, oh, shame on you for not seeing these women as people. But then it'll be like women aren't attracted to things they see. Women, what like it will then just go and speak for women. In fact, Fred has a whole book on what women want in a man, written by Fred Stoeker later on. This was like 2009 or something, and I would be fascinated to read it, but I don't have the stomach for it for, a year or two
Well,
probably.
the
But
first thing, if you're trying to like get into girls' pants, you gotta do some ice training.
So true. And the second thing, learn to jog.
that's true. That's true. No, only women jog, and there's
Oh
millions
yeah.
of them in rural Iowa
And every
jogging.
single one of them will kill you instantly if you look at their boobs.
That's true. So after like Fred finishes telling his life story, and to be clear, his life story just reemerges at random points all over the place. It gives you like advice on various things. It talks about how we, quote, live in a culture where the sexual boundaries have been obliterated, disappearing like the chalk lines marking the batter's blocks box after 6 innings of play, end quote. Bad analogy, not
Terrible
true.
analogy.
Um, it talks about the oversexed culture. It talks about all kinds of different stuff. It talks about like, the guilt you may feel. It says, a guy wrote in saying, I think we should break it off, but now I feel obligated to marry her since we've been having sex for so long. And I wrote here, and you could put this on most of these stories. The damage and guilt is from purity culture, not from the sex, right? There is sex that is not healthy for you to be having, or you're not an emotional place for it. But so many of these stories are, I feel so dirty after doing this. And I'm like, and that almost always these are people who were raised being told you are dirty if you do this, right?
Hmm.
Not everyone feels that way. Like that's the case. And it goes. I love some of the little quotes it has, like a guy that says, "I'll commit to this abstinence thing, but no way I'm giving up blowjobs. I've had dozens of them, and to
I'm
be honest, I really
I
like
really
them.
like them. I'm glad you highlighted that too.
Hell yeah, brother."
Well, and for all the for all the talk in here about not viewing a woman as a collection of body parts, about viewing her as a whole person. I mean, of course, as we go on, it's not because, yeah, she's a whole person, you should look at her as such, but it's because, well, she is going to be somebody's property and you can't treat her as like public property,
Right.
this, that, or the other. It's real disease in that way. But there's also just some very casual sexism threaded throughout the prose, even between these parts. Like when it talks about the people who are anxious about other people having sex in their teenage years and they are not, like, oh, like I was less of a like teenager, I was less of a like interesting like whole person because I didn't go out. And this is like a quote from the book, like, because I didn't go out and get a BJ from like Billie Jane BJ blowers.
He lives in the Pornhub universe. He does. He I like just so many anecdotes. When I was 14, my sister's boyfriend Brock said to me with a wicked little grin, once you taste the candy, you'll never say no again, so you better not taste it.
So
And it's
glad
like,
you highlighted
these
that one.
anecdotes are
Yes.
so fucking weird,
Okay, and
dude.
they're really weird because that is his sister's boyfriend. What are we doing here?
Well, and the candy shit especially, right? It's, threaded through all of this is this idea that every sexual act, like a gateway drug, right, is inherently and inevitably escalatory unless you vigilantly guard against it, right? Right here, page 16, sex is a slippery slope, right? If you don't ram a stake into the ground, first of all, very, very sexually aggressive verbiage. If you don't ram a stake into the ground and declare, this is as far as I go and I won't go any further, then you'll lose your footing on the slippery slope of sex. Because of the pleasure, sexual escalation was natural.
Not the sex slope. That's the worst slope you can
I
be on.
I
It's all
hate to,
greasy.
I hate it. I hate it. Um, and it also frames it the whole thing, and this is like also ties to the political project. It frames the whole thing as there is this whole culture that is going to attack you for this. And it says Christian kids will even mock you. They'll laugh and ask, why be so straight? Get a life. Which, I don't think he knows what straight means, whatever. They pressure your values at every turn. It'll talk about how every party is going to attack you. Everyone's going to do that. Every girl at your high school is gonna, basically be wearing nothing but a string bikini
That's
all the
right.
time. It
Underwear as outerwear.
yeah, that was what the fuck is he talking about? Um, but like it's describing this as this culture you're under assault from, this grand conspiracy that Satan is a part of, right? And so it wants to make you feel under siege. It wants to make you feel like you are not a part of this world, quite literally. This world is not our home. We are just passing through. And because of that relationship, that then allows them to further the political project later on. Once they've control your sexuality, and because you're then behaving in a way that is not natural, right? You're behaving in a neurotic way. The world does feel hostile to you
Yeah.
because you are behaving hostilely to the world. And then there was one place to turn, and it is to these institutions that then have a grander goal, and you are going to become a good foot soldier for them, or you're going to lose your mind trying.
And the
And I did
grander-
the second one.
and the grander goal thereof isn't really, as we said, this is a pretty consciously, or tries to be a pretty consciously apolitical book. But he does give the game away a little bit here, beginning of chapter 4, Nobody Escapes from Adventure Island. Not too many decades ago, guys were married off at about the same age you were when you took your driver's test. Taking a wife at age 16 had to help the old hormones. But that was a different time and a different era, and getting married at 16 today is no more realistic than beating Shaquille O'Neal in a game of one-on-one. It's just not going to happen. So you've been dealt some lousy cards, he says. And that's the thing. Lousy cards. It's a lousy lot in life that you have to go through this without being tied from a very young age to the one person who's going to be able to sexually gratify you, right? This is like the ideal, this is the platonic ideal of a civilization for him, is where this happens.
Well, and he goes on to talk about how in this society that we're now in, it's not uncommon after high school to get your college degree, and then maybe go and you get a fucking doctoral degree, whatever, right? That all, but at no point, and I can't tell. This is one of those things, and there's a number of things like this where it's like, are you being disingenuous, or do you genuinely not understand what it is that you're saying, right? Because obviously the reason for the premarital taboo, for that whole order of sexuality, is for all of the things that Jacob was saying, as well as just the general need to advance the species, right? To procreate. And that earlier, when there was less medicine and things like that, you just had to have more kids, and you had to have them earlier in order to keep humanity going. But now those rules are a lot more arbitrary than they used to be, and we have reordered our life as a species around those new ways of existing. So do you really believe that these other things are the result of some sort of God-divined objective morality? Like, do you actually think that? Or are you doing this because it is conducive to your project? And I don't know the answer.
I think I don't know in these guys' particular case, but it also talks about like, there was a time where you were a child or you were a man, right? And first of all, like, and it gives this idea that like until very recently there was no distinction between childhood and manhood. That's objectively not true. The Bible talks about young men. Obviously you can give other examples, but even in like the Bible, it talks about Jesus as a young man when he's like about to be like 13 or whatever. When
A
he's like,
portrait of the Jesus as a young man. Sorry, I just had to say.
fantastic. It talks about, youth. It has different words for that. It maybe doesn't use the word teenager per se. Also, it's not necessarily true that people got married around the time you get your driver's license. In some societies,
Right.
for some people, that's not the case for everybody. That there have been different societies and people have lived different fucking ways.
But we're looking at American settler colonial
Mhm.
society circa, mid 1600s up
Sure.
until roughly the Industrial Revolution.
Yes. Um, and I think this is interesting. Another quote quickly after that. It says, the bifurcation myth that says you can do what you want as a teenager because after you move into adulthood, it won't matter. This myth caused me many problems and will create havoc if you believe it. And here's the fact of the matter. Um, I don't know how Fred was raised specifically. That's not true. Like American high schools, especially a lot of these private schools that this is going to be whatever, are like extremely like you got to get into the good college so you can get a good, like it's
Yep.
actually like, you know, kids are becoming like influencers with this idea of like money. Like people have this actually hyper hustle culture grind set thing is like that's instilled younger and younger. This idea that there are no consequences when you're younger. Um, that's certainly something I was never raised with, and I think this is something that they want kids to be like ready to fight and be the good soldiers at a younger age. And whether Fred is writing this with the intention of like, and they're going to be good teenagers, and as soon as they hit 18, they're going to join TPUSA. I don't know that he's thinking that specifically, but this actually connects because again, these people have and continue to work with people like Charlie Kirk and TPUSA, right? This actually filters, become these soldiers of these groups, like the foot soldiers of the new right movement. This is how it actually happens. And this idea of like you're a kid, you don't have to worry about this stuff. It actually wants you to worry about it desperately, which is the reason why I was like 12 years old going up to random kids at the mall trying to tell them about Jesus. Like, because I was driven to do that.
Well, his stated point here too is again, like you were saying, not so much to do with that piece, although
No.
I definitely think it's there if you
Mhm.
read between the lines. His main point here is that like if you are a kid and not even kid, right? You're an adolescent, you're a young adult, whatever, and you spend the first part of that sowing your wild oats, right?
Mhm.
That shit's gonna catch up with you later on. You can't just have these experiences and then live a different life after that. And this, of course, is in part because that is his own personal experience. In
Mhm.
his own life, there's a very clear, like, dividing line between the old life and the new life, but he still has complicated feelings about that old life. What he wants to do is be like, well, that was just the old Fred. New Fred is a different guy. But he is, I think, making a reasonable point here that one's life is just a continuation from one thing to the other.
Mhm.
It's just startlingly lacking in any sort of self critique. Like, and the other thing that jumps out at me about this as well is that whole thing, the fact that, yes, the choices you make as a teenager impact your life in adulthood, right? That's a double edged sword. If you spend your adolescence a neurotic wreck about sexual attraction, like I did, that means that neurosis is going to follow you all the way into your adult life. Even
And
after
then
you.
it talks about the women who come to their husbands and say, I feel gross having sex, right?
Right.
And there's no analysis of why the women might feel that
None.
way aside from women. Am I right?
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
like, because you didn't like stay pure enough. Like,
Yeah.
this is your fault. It's like, that's not what's going on here, man. Like,
And to the extent that it's engaged with at all, it's something that the woman does to the man, right? Like, I just don't like sex. I really wish I didn't have to do it anymore. You're probably saying to yourself, yeah, right, but that'll never happen to me, you know? Like he talks about, women being frigid. He talks about women using sex as a manipulative weapon to get their own way, like being more interested in their careers than in fulfilling their men sexually. Nothing about what they want from sex, because it's not truly sex that they want in his estimation. It's just, the emotion of being held by somebody who does want it.
It talks about a guy, Mark, right? And it quotes just stories from
That
guys. I'm
Mark?
sure maybe, and maybe some of these stories are true. I also think they're just kind of, pulling from the ether. But it says, I've been hooked on sex for years, and I'm counting on marriage to free me. He said, I'll be able to have sex whenever I want, and Satan won't be able to tempt me at all. When we got together a few years later, I wasn't surprised to hear that marriage hadn't fixed his problem. You know, Fred, my wife doesn't desire sex as often as I do, he said. Oh, really? I don't want to seem like a sex addict or anything, but I probably have as many unmet desires now as I did before my marriage. On top of all that, some areas of sexual exploration seem embarrassing or immodest to her. Sometimes she even calls them kinky. I think she's rather prudish, but what do I say? In our experience, you can't say much. And then it says, first of all, sex has different meanings to men and women. Men primarily receive
Shut
intimacy.
up. Shut the fuck up. This is
In-
this in
yeah,
this
exactly.
is James Dobson right
Yes,
here.
right
This
here.
piece, this is the signature James Dobson thing. All women want to do is eat hot chip, fantasize about fulfilling relationships with men, and lie.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and it says they want intimacy just before and during intercourse, or sorry, men primarily receive intimacy just before and during intercourse, and women gain intimacy through tugging, touching, sharing,
Tugging.
hugging. Yeah, that would be better. Hugging and communicating deeply. It is it any wonder the frequency of sex is less important to women than to men, as Mark woefully discovered? Because
Citation
the
needed.
because of the differences between men and women, forming a satisfying sex life in marriage is hardly a slam dunk. It's more like making a half court shot. And it's like, okay, so after all this, if after all this, having a sexually satisfying marriage is making a half court shot, then like, why don't we, I don't know, why don't we completely give up, right? Like, why don't we just like, castrate ourselves? Like, I'm serious. Like, this is just misery. There is no freedom here. There is no happiness because it's not even promising you good sex. It is, if you listen to stuff Fred says, he doesn't even want you to have kinks inside of your marriage. He doesn't want you to exercise. He wants you to have this very strict view of marriage, and then the women don't enjoy it. And women are raised with things like, I quoted at the top of the episode what Alex said, being told sex is going to be painful for you because you need blood to seal a covenant. And of course, the woman doesn't want to have sex. Why would
Because
they?
she doesn't want to do her job. He says straight up, your wife may not care to help you in your battle, which battle is regulating your sexual impropriety.
Right. Yes. He makes this explicit a little bit later on. And again, none of this is biologically accurate, but it's his belief that like libido and sex drive is a direct function of how much sperm is stored in the balls, and that like the more sperm is stored in the balls, the hornier you get.
Well, I
And
mean, there's not enough room because that's where your piss is stored.
well,
That's true.
See, that's what I'm saying. He gets it wrong. It's not sperm that's stored in the ball. It's pee.
You're not allowed to piss before marriage. We know this.
But like, yeah, and then you look at that and it's like, well, first of all, there's this whole thing where he talks about wet dreams and how like the thing about
Yeah.
wet dreams is that is your body's way of self-regulating lustful thoughts. I'm sure we'll get to that a little bit later in more
I
detail.
mean, it
but
connects here just fine,
yeah, that like you can't be having lustful thoughts. And so what you need to do is when you see a jogger running down the side of the road, you know what? I'm just gonna find it again because it's so funny.
Yeah, do it.
I gotta find the quote. Here we go. I'm gonna read this whole thing because it's so weird. This
Do
is
it.
from chapter 3, Studying Late. Whenever I approached a roadside jogger while driving, my eyes fixed on her like heat-seeking missiles. I had to move quickly, or I would soon pass her. But trying to look away from a jogger created a problem. I couldn't drive safely if I was concentrated on not looking out for her. That could be dangerous even on the country roads of Iowa. After all, I didn't want to run over anyone. Studying the situation, I found a solution. Rather than look completely away, I turned my gaze to the opposite side of the road and kept the jogger at the edge of my peripheral vision. She wasn't completely out of sight, but she was out of mind. My body began to fight back in some interesting ways. First, my brain argued fiercely with me. If you keep this up, you'll cause a wreck or run over somebody. I considered this argument, then answered, you know, and I know, that's highly unlikely. Believe me, I can handle a car. My body's
Oh, he can handle a
Oh,
car.
you're telling me. My body's second attempt to stop me was very peculiar. Whenever I saw a jogger, how many joggers is this guy seeing?
In rural Iowa, to be clear.
Just down a country road, and reflexively looked away. My mind tricked me into believing I recognized the individual. Recognized? Why did I say it that way? Recognized the individual,
That's how Fred
prompting a
talks.
second look. My mind was so nimble that nearly every female jogger reminded me of someone I knew. Talk about irritating. It took a while for me to stop falling for that ruse. My brain tried one last trick. As I passed the jogger without a direct look, I would momentarily relax In the same moment, my brain took advantage of my lowered guard by ordering my eyes to glance into the rear view mirror for a more direct look. Depending on whether she was coming or going, I scored on that one. But then I caught on to what was happening, and that really burned me up. I had to learn not to drop my guard after passing her, and in time, that trick faded away as well.
Josh, I like that you reading Fred Stoeker's writing sounds like the top 10 female Sonic characters video.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, I couldn't look at joggers anymore. What a price to pay.
Fred be nimble, Fred be quick.
Who's that jogger running down the road? Why, it's Amy Rose, of course.
I was thinking the literal exact same thing. I can't believe you brought that up.
Oh God.
You have to know, I have watched that video conservatively 100 times. I just here's the thing that I wanted to say about this, right? Whether you're talking about this weird like obsession with joggers or the more, I guess, prosaic description of how things are when you're a teen and it do be like that, the thing that this has in common is that you are setting yourself up to develop a complex.
Yes.
And it is a complex that that you are not actually yourself responsible for. It's all the fault of and can only be accounted for by other people, women specifically, right? And this is what ends up happening when that is in your head. I just plugged in my old laptop and was able
Let's
to
go.
track down a journal entry here from April 19, 2005.
Oh, wow.
And one more reason I cannot have a girlfriend at this point in time. I'm struggling substantially with lust. Sex taking priority over the actual person or whatever. I mean, if I ever got a girlfriend, I would never be able to see just her shining character traits, as it were. I would, unfortunately, just look at her excellent physical attributes. I suppose it's fairly normal for people my age, but it still makes me feel oddly dirty. I always try my hardest to respect women and treat them as fellow children of God or whatever, but it is difficult to do so.
I mean, how do you not feel that way, right? Like at best, without, like, or it turns into, as I've seen many times, like people resenting women.
And then you become an incel, yeah.
Right, being angry with women, feeling like they owe you something. Then getting to the age where you can marry and not knowing how to communicate to a woman and being like, I guess I deserve a, state mandated waifu. I know that crossover there is a little different, but
I think it
feeling like you
stems from
deserve
the
it.
same fundamental impulse. And what makes me really sad when I read that is like, God, if some fucking 15-year-old told me that, I would just be like, kid, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's normal. This is so fucking normal.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that everybody experiences and you have nothing to feel bad about.
Yeah.
Whereas to write a book like this, Every Young Man's Battle, I think is such a, like, we can laugh obviously about this jogger shit and we will continue to do so, but this shit damages a lot of kids. And it's funny right up until it isn't. I guess that's the only point that I'm trying to make.
Oh, yeah.
And it normalizes, and it flattens, right? All of this stuff. It calls you normal for feeling these things, and you do. But then it's like you're normal because you feel like, and then it like compares it basically to an animalistic instinct. Makes you seem wild for having these feelings despite it being normal. So you basically end up having this mentality that like as a man, you are like this ravenous creature.
Right.
Right. And so then you obviously there's like that self-hatred, but then it flattens it being like, well, it's the same thing to by really pulling heavy from that one quote from Jesus saying it's the same thing to feel lust as it is to hook up with a woman, right? It says that the way, whatever, it really flattens it till it's like, I'm not kidding. I knew people who said it's the same thing for me. He's like, well, I grabbed this girl's ass without her wanting me to, and that was wrong. But she was also wearing a short skirt, and the class said that was a sexual sin, so we're even. And
Right.
and because there is no discussion of consent or anything like that in this book, it is going to lead you on one of those paths. And none of the paths here, if you follow it and take this as truth, are going to be good. at best you're going to become like isolated and freaked out and not in self-loathing, and at worst like you are going to take this stuff out on people. And like, as someone who like, and I have a sort of a unique experience with this as like, a gay person, but like living a life where literally like if there was stuff on TV or an ad or anything like that, my family had like code words to tell us to bounce our eyes. They would use the term bounce your eyes from this book, right? Uh, like it's like you can't even like walk in public being like, oh my God, I saw a lingerie ad. I'm a bad person, right? And then of course there's another layer of complication when you're me and you're just like, okay, that's
That doesn't
clothes,
do
I
anything for
guess.
me, but sure, like this is bad or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so like I understand I don't have maybe this, yeah, not that there's any standard experience with this stuff, but like there's just it's levels of neuroses that like, every now and then, like just even still to this day, I'll have like thoughts and I'm just like, where the fuck did that come from? And it's like it's this shit and stuff like this shit. Um, yeah,
How
not
did
great.
this compare with your experience, Lenore? I have to imagine that if you didn't grow up with this, none of this was in your gestalt when you were an adolescent. But I'm curious how it hits you.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. Like what I remember of, sexual education in, school, being talked to by trusted older adults, is fairly boilerplate. Like this is, your body, this is somebody else's body, keep yourself to yourself. This is how these things work. Like to the extent that like I mean, to the extent that I was neurotic about anything, it's just, oh, like I have this relationship with myself, masturbation, sexuality, whatever, that like is weird and new, and like, I didn't have this greater like I didn't have this greater battle between good and evil to fit this into. There I do remember, this is burned into my memory for some weird fucking reason. Like we had the World Book Encyclopedia at home, and I'd look through that, I'd read it about, history and like, science and whatnot. There's also shit about sexuality in there, and
Hmm.
the way it was written was weird. There's stuff in there that like, oh, like you're sexually curious at this age. Like if you're a boy, you'll drop a pencil to look up a girl's skirt. Like, oh,
What?
like, yeah, no, it was
Did
fucking
Fred write
I literally,
it?
this was on my mind the whole time.
Weird.
It was written very much in this same sort of like flattening way, right? Conflating, your standard interrogation of yourself as a newly sexual being with like these bizarre infringements on, other people's autonomy. Like there was shit in there, like there was a little like article about masturbation in this encyclopedia that's like, XYZ, but caps it off with many people believe masturbation is a misuse of your sexual powers. That phrase, sexual powers, like
What?
stumbling across that at like 11 or 12 is like it sticks with you, and it doesn't necessarily form a complex without this sort of like
Right.
um
The
um
scaffolding. Yeah.
scaffolding, but like it is to have this like as a ripple of something much darker. Again, it feels like a demon stepped on my shadow.
It's like fucking and Fred himself is suffering. Look at his Instagram. Fred has hundreds of videos talking about this shit for like less likes than we get.
Fred's Instagram is one of the most depressing things you will ever see.
It's
I
so sad. It's 20 years after this. I'm talking about experiences that are now 40 something years old. Like I can't get the Playboys out of my head. Oh,
he
it's
can't move
really
forward,
sad.
and that's the thing that really gets me, right? And that's the thing that I find that when I get back in this headspace, I find myself struggling with it a lot as well. That you can't go back and change the past, obviously, but what you can do is create sort of a new future that aligns better with what it is that you want. But when what you do is you go into the past and you're like, okay, I'm laying down this marker of like, at this point, I thought I wanted this, but now I'm going to change everything. And the stuff from before then, well, that's just not part of me anymore. You're trying to have it both ways. And what ends up happening is you just get stuck in your own past.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's very telling in that sense of like having it both ways. Um, there's bits and pieces in here about how, like, look, it's not all a conspiracy. Like, we are mixing human standards with God's standards, and like we can make correct choices not to be sexually impure beings. There's that, but like again, he's having it both sides of that argument, because there's the decision not to consume R-rated, sexy movies, for example. That's you.
Like
But like,
Forrest Gump, nothing will get you hard as
Sally
Forrest Gump.
Field in Forrest Gump. Buddy, let me tell you something.
oh God.
American Pie, he loves to reference that one. But
But there's
God,
that.
how many
There's the realm
times do you
of
think he's jorked it to Allison Hannigan?
God.
Probably so many.
God, I can only imagine. But like, that's the realm of choice, though, and like women, choosing to dress sexy, like that is the province of Satan. Like,
mm.
Well,
Well, and
yes,
speaking of
yes.
Satan, I'm sorry, I just have to read like right around the same section, because this is literal spiritual cosmic war. You are under siege. These thoughts are actually can be supernatural sometimes. It says, and I wrote, Satan does a little trolling. It wrote, you see, before marriage, Satan does everything he can to get you to have sex with your girlfriend, and after marriage, he does everything he can to keep you from having sex with your wife. And that's like a very funny line, but it's also like, when you literally believe there is Satan out there, that's like you don't know what thoughts are yours, what's not,
hmm
it's like there is a cosmic battle, literally, eh, happening for your soul. And like, I don't know, it's hard enough to be a kid with hormones or an adult with fucking hormones. And like, without this, like, cosmic good and evil, stakes,
Right.
this Job story that it keeps, coming back to
Well,
he's got a
happening.
lot of words about Job.
and it can only present young women who are then, I don't know, the source of sexual temptation, right? As being an ontologically evil thing, right? Like
Yes.
this paves the way for so much misogyny. I want to read a little bit here. There are many girls who aren't attractive to you and don't generate impure thoughts. They can include your friends, stepsisters, classmates, and church gal pals. Blah, 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 blah. But there are young women who hit every attraction key on your keyboard.
Mm.
God, weird, whatever.
Just
But-
face roll.
uh, every key labeled attract. Like Rachel, that new student, or maybe the new girl in the worship band who makes you breathless every time she gets up and sings. You neigh, drawing them toward your corral, but only in your mind. That's right, folks. If this were our podcast, this would be another installation of AJ's Horse Corner, because this guy
Yes.
is comparing all of this shit with being a horse. Um, among those thoughts, maybe, or no, sorry, among those what? Among us? Among, I guess, the people who are attractive to you, might include an old girlfriend to whom you're still deeply attached because of your past sexual sins. You mate easily with her in your mind because of your many trysts together. Mentally, she's still right next to you. Because of your former intimacy, she may seem yours for the taking in your mind. You remember the thrills, so you feel free to play with your thoughts. But you must lead her out of your corral and stop lurking. The perimeter of the mind processes the live attractions that canter up over the horizon and past our corrals. By starving the attractions, these young women retreat to safety zones of friendship or acquaintance, where they no longer threaten your purity.
Well, and even
Woo.
Yeah, like, what do you do with that?
well, and even that is not a safeguard against like these infringements on your purity, right? Because there's a like one of the most bizarre segments in this book is a bit like this he has a whole bunch of people like writing in with their stories, and this guy's like, yeah, like my sister-in-law is pretty hot and she was asleep and I jerked off while watching her sleep, and it's like, excuse me.
That doesn't do justice to it. I need to read it. I need
Oh,
to
yeah,
read it
yeah,
because
go
this is
for it.
actually the most pornographic scene in the whole thing.
Mm. What are you doing, step bro?
It literally is that.
The most pornographic thing that doesn't involve sumo wrestlers.
Right. You stare at a sexy model and lust. Your motor revs into the red zone and you need some type of release or the engine's going to blow. You're
going to.
preparing your body for intercourse, even if it's false intercourse with a
Mhm.
jar of Vaseline.
Woo!
I want to throw up. But then here's the money quote. No doubt about it. Visual sexual gratification is a form of sex for men. As males, we draw sexual gratification and chemical highs through our eyes. Alex remembers the time he was watching TV with his sister-in-law. The rest of the family was at the mall. Let's really kind of lean into the mic here. Gonna turn my gain up just a bit.
Yeah.
Light some candles.
She was lying flat on her stomach on the floor in front of me, wearing tight shorts, and she'd fallen asleep watching TV. I was on the chair, and I happened to look down and see her upper thigh and a trace of her underwear. I tried to ignore it, but my heart started racing a little, and my eyes kept looking at the back of her upper thigh. It got so exciting that I began to stare and get really excited. I had to release it somehow. I masturbated while she slept, right out in the open.
Unbelievable.
What?
Oh.
What are you doing, bro-in-law? Bad stuff, folks.
Oh,
Bad
one's-
And again,
bad
like
stuff.
if I have to imagine if you're reading this and you're receiving this as sexual education, like it's just going to become, part of your priors, part of your assumptions that yeah, I'm surrounded by people who may or may not have done this sort of thing.
I mean, the one thing that I think it does get right is that when you are that age, anything can set you off.
That's true. Yeah.
But that doesn't. Why? Why would you write this?
That is information that like you could not torture out
No,
of me.
I didn't want to know that.
I'm just imagining like Jordan Peterson talking about this book.
She was asleep and
Oh, no, I didn't
and
mean
you
that.
saw
I mean the
You could just
psychological
see
parts.
the
just,
hem of her panties.
That's not what I meant.
And
I meant
suddenly
the
all
psychology
all
parts.
The,
I meant
all the chaos of my psychology was
All that I could
that's
think
right.
about was taking her.
It's too late, Jacob.
no, I was just like the women seldom understand this because they aren't sexually stimulated the same way. Like talking about the like details.
Doesn't it read like the beginning of a Penthouse letter, though? Like,
Yes.
it's like,
God.
and then she woke up and she saw my larger erect member and she started sucking on it and blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
Well, and so much of his
Yeah.
frame of reference is from those like skin mags. Like he
Yeah.
goes back to gallery several times.
That's true.
I also like he says a lot, like, obviously he's writing for teenage boys, but he does a lot describe teenage girls in ways that I don't like that this grown-ass man, like
Oh,
describing them
yeah.
as nubile. And like he says, walking the halls of any public high school in America can leave any guy gasping for breath. And I'm like, hold up now. Let's take a couple steps back. But yeah, no, his frame of reference is like he's imagining like Catholic schoolgirls, I think, from like these like it's just the whole universe is like a porno for Fred.
Well, and indeed, like the bit where he's talking about his grandfather, right, in his machine shop, right? His grandfather's got all these like naked women up on the walls, and like first of all, like being horny clearly didn't prevent his grandfather from pursuing a trade, but like B, like what the conclusion that he draws from this is just the fact that a man could put pictures of naked women up on his walls made a huge statement about women. First, since none of these women were his wife, it meant that unclothed women were public property. They were items, things, objects for everyone to look at. Second, those images meant that they were objects that men could use for their pleasure. Those pinups might not have seemed too significant to my grandfather, but they certainly changed the way I viewed women. And I'm talking about all women, not just the busty models in those pictures. I began to view women as a little less than human, as if they were just a little less than men. Again, like she can't be a sexual being unless she's desired / owned by some man.
Yeah, this is misogyny masquerading as feminism.
Mm.
And I again, I've just been like digging through some of these old journals, and I had forgotten, like just being very, very frank here. I had forgotten just how gnarly some of this shit was.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at a journal entry here, also from 2005, where I am talking about a girl who was a friend of mine in middle school, who then ended up going to another high school. And I had heard rumors that when she went to high school, she became sexually active. And I've got this entire journal entry writing about how she is now basically like fully corrupted, right? She's damaged goods. She is no longer a viable anything for me because these horrible ways of the world have corrupted her flesh. I mean, it's let me see if I can just find that. I closed this journal entry, and again, this is really vile. But I think it's important to point this up because this is where this kind of thinking, I think, naturally goes. I say, if you are a sewage worker, it will sooner or later ruin a good set of clothes, regardless of how protective you are.
That's what it'll do. And I mean, I was in situations, right, at my high school. It's a classic, whatever. What do you where you take a sticker or something and you take it on and off like a towel, right? You do it a few times and then the sticker won't stick to the towel. And it's like, well, that's what happens when you have sex, Or I've seen, this one didn't happen to me, the sticker one did, but like where, you take a flower and you pass it around an auditorium and everyone puts their hands on it. And then by the end, of course, it's messed up. And then you got the pastor who's like, yeah, who would want this rose?
She
Right.
loves me. She loves me not.
And the small percentage of me that still like holds any like affection for Christianity would just scream, Jesus wants that rose, right? I understand that's not the point. Like, that
But it's
obviously, but there's no point in calling out the hypocrisy because there's no such thing as a real or fake Christian when in this world, right? That's a whole nother tangent. But like it's so frustrating to me, but it leads it leads to those feelings and thoughts. Like there's no other direction that it can take you, and it makes you guilty, and it makes you behave in bad and weird ways, even if you break from this mentality, right? You break from this mentality, and then you decide sex is okay, but your relationship to sex is not just fine now. Like you have guilt, you have feelings about other people, what other people should be doing. And I think I don't know. It's not great.
No,
Well, 'cause
it fills you with anger. That's what it
Yes.
does. And that anger just gets stoked. And again, I can read it in this journal entry. I'm not going to read more of it because it really it's gross. Like
Sure.
I'm reading it and I'm like, I am very upset that I ever wrote this.
Sure.
Because it is just talking more and more. It's not being like, whether or not this has happened, whatever, this doesn't change my perception. Who knows what had happened? No, it's like, well, maybe the rumors aren't true. Maybe if the rumors aren't true, she is still pure and chaste and therefore good. Maybe I'm just prejudging based on these rumors. I bet maybe, rather than questioning the underlying assumption itself. There is one excerpt in here actually that I read it and I was like, wait, this actually sounds like kind of a healthy approach. But then Fred points to it as like an example of the worst thing you could ever possibly do when parenting your son. Brandon told me. Also, I just love that he names random, like it's just, here's a guy. Who is it? Who fucking knows? This is Brandon.
Hi, Brandon.
What?
Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Brandon. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's
Brandon
go.
told me about
Bringing it back.
We're I'm broken. We're
Tell
2
you
hours.
what, when you're on the Mustang Ranch, I bet there's a lot of Brandon.
So true.
He's broken. She's Brandon. Yeah.
And then
Something. I don't
and then
know.
once you get into the showers with the boys, it's all over.
Hey.
Brandon told me about being with a bunch of guys playing Nintendo late one Saturday night.
Playing Nintendo.
Let's go. He was supposed to be home at 11 p.m., but he fell asleep and didn't wake until 3 in the morning. Why would you not just be doing a sleepover at that? But whatever. Horrified, he raced home in his car to find his mom on her knees, praying desperately for his safe return, tears streaming everywhere. And where was dear old dad? He'd gone to bed hours earlier, smirking at his wife's prayers and saying brightly, "Quit worrying. He's probably found some cute girl and is getting laid for the first time. It's about time for him to grow up." I think that's like... I don't know about it's about time for him to grow up, although
Yeah.
but like more broadly, like that to me feels healthy,
Yeah,
Imagine Brandon's like 41.
I have so much more respect for this like hypothetical dad than
Right.
for anybody else in this book because I believe it's the same dad figure who's like yeah like he put a thing of condoms in the family car
Right.
and said hey you know they're there if you need them like that's healthy right that's
Wait,
being safe.
Lenore, are you telling me that you think Brandon doesn't exist?
I mean I'm sure
He was playing Nintendo.
and he got the
Uh,
high score.
I'm gonna put my foot down and say, guarantee you, Fred does not. Fred would not know the difference, and he calls all gaming Nintendo.
Absolutely.
His mother-in-law would know because she's a real gamer.
He's playing
That's
Nintendo.
true.
He's got the high score, and sitting behind him, chilling in the chair, is your wife. But you look, oh, you ain't there. Halls of Illusions, Insane Clown
Uh,
Posse. Anybody?
No,
Sorry,
sorry.
go on.
I, I'm sure. I'm sure it was a good joke.
I'm a bad Michigander. I'm not up on my
Sure.
ICP.
There was a time
Well,
in high school where I listened almost exclusively to ICP.
We made
well,
like one audience member very happy.
it's Lenore re-listening
The
to
single the
episode.
single Juggalo listener to Socialist Shelf sound off in the comments.
Well,
Hey,
whoop, whoop, y'all.
we looked at our demographic breakdown. It didn't mention whether they were juggalos or not,
Mm.
but top music was Americana, pop, and country, which I was a little not surprised by, but what was more surprising to me or not was we got a lot of British listeners. I was surprised by
Hmm.
that.
Uh,
Kind of
Well, you
nice.
know what? Then maybe we can get him to the Dark Carnival.
Maybe we can.
top top genre for us on Spotify Wrapped for music that our listeners also listen to was soundtracks. It's people listening to cast recordings. Not beating the theater kid allegations, I'm afraid. And also probably video game soundtracks. I bet those are also filed under soundtracks.
Last thing I'll say on that is almost a quarter of our listeners are non-binary, which is, I feel like
That rules.
Our progress to abolish gender continues apace.
the math
Good
is
work, comrades.
crazy on that.
That's so
Anyway,
funny.
to take a really dark turn from that, we go into a really harrowing story when you talk about, it's like not late, but like halfway through the book when you actually get into Steve's backstory, like a pretty
Yes.
good way into the book. And he talks about like while he was not the level of freak Fred was and is, because that's impossible. Like no one has ever done it like Fred. He had an experience where he got his girlfriend pregnant, and because of the time in their life, he pressured her into getting an abortion.
Right.
Um, and obviously we know this. Obviously, not that it's great to pressure someone into getting an abortion, for any reason, but we know how evangelical culture's feelings on that. And in fact, Steve has done some serious activism around this and worked with anti-abortion groups, worked with, I believe, Family Research Council and things like
Oh
that.
wow.
Because these
So
connections
he regrets the choice that he made, so he wants to make sure that nobody else can ever have
can
a
make
choice.
it ever. Yes.
Or more
Um,
more accurately, he regrets pressuring, and
Yes.
he's very explicit about this, that like
Mhm.
she wanted to keep the kid even if it meant giving it up for adoption. He was like, no, I want you to have the abortion.
Right. And he writes, I brought every argument to bear in order to stop her. Having a child out of wedlock would have been too humiliating to me. I want to note
Ugh.
really quick before I continue that like part of that shame culture is that, that child out of wedlock. Um, all I wanted was to get this situation behind me. The result, I never put it behind me. In fact, the grief and shame of pressuring her to have an abortion literally almost killed me. 80 ulcers grew in my stomach and intestines, and I've bled to death if things had continued the way they were. Not long after that, I hit a car in an intersection and dropped out of school. There was too much pain to even think of studying. I'd killed more than my baby, I'd killed my life, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the future, whenever I held someone else's baby, it was awful. Every cry, every squeal of the word daddy brought sorrow and suffering welling up, and the emotional and spiritual scars remain to this day. Sure, I'm forgiven, but I hope these are scars you'll never have to bear. And it's really intense, and it's also like honest in a way that I think Fred never is. Um, but like it's also like obviously it doesn't want to like it doesn't do enough to highlight that like the pressuring part. I think it's more about like and this is where sexual sin leads you, like this is where having sex leads you without like, once again, the word consent is not used. It's not talked about. The idea of autonomy is not really discussed.
Hmm.
Um, and the pressuring her to get an abortion and the abortion are seen as just parts of the looking at a girl and thinking her boobs are nice and pressuring a girl to get an abortion. They're like flattened to be kind of the same thing and all part of the same sauce. Which like can show you, and then when you are of the belief that an abortion is literally murder, as these people are, or at least claim to be, then you put yourself in a place where, as someone reading this, you're like, you can draw a direct line between like, wow, I thought my classmate was hot, and like, if I keep doing this, I'm gonna be a murderer. Like
Right.
that's where it will leave you. And
Yeah.
and then of course it connects to the broader political
And
project in really in sinister ways.
and whatever like honest thing it speaks to in Steve's soul, like this feelings that he's that these feelings that he's having, it's couched in this unavoidably hierarchical, patriarchal, privileging of his own anxiety, his own pain,
Yeah.
ulcers versus a baby, right? You want to talk about things like growing in you that hurt you, right?
Yeah.
Like it's from the jump, like his first priority is his sexual impropriety, grappling with it, his battle. I mean, Fred gets in on the action too, like right at the top of chapter 6, right? When he's talking about his wife giving birth, and it says, and like yeah, here we go. Before Brenda gave birth to our fourth child, I, Fred, became convinced through prayer that the child would be a boy, our second son. I was so certain of this that I told her and a few close friends that I was sure it would be a boy. And so, anxiety. The baby came out face up. Good, I thought. I'll have a perfect view. Anxious, I gently urged Brenda, come on, sweetheart, push a little more. Like, literally, like, your wife is going through one of the most painful and traumatic experiences that you can have, and your concern is whether the kid is gonna be a boy. And, like, that, it's the most insidious strain running through this book, I think. And it rears its ugly head again, like, way toward the end, where he's talking about, like, loving a woman is also loving her father, right? Respecting
Oh,
his like
that part
protection of her.
is.
The bit where like like the dad being protective of his daughter says, okay, you can't understand how I'm feeling and I know what you're thinking, right? I'm a father, you're not. I have a daughter, you don't. And crucially, I was a teenager once, so I do know what you're thinking, right? So what you're being taught, it seems to me, to with the legacy you're inheriting is, being worthy of being that figure, right? Being worthy of knowing somebody better than they do and acting on it and exerting control based on that.
It's really notable to your point, like in that part where he's talking about the abortion, we actually don't get any sort of coda on where that woman ended up. We
No.
don't learn anything about what her feelings were. I mean, we hear, I guess, that there was a desire again to keep the pregnancy.
Yeah.
But beyond that, nothing about her actual emotional state or anything. Because he probably doesn't know.
She goes in the same void with, Fred's fiance cast offs.
Right.
Literally.
Like they are cast into that same just nothingness, that outer darkness, basically.
I mean,
in
they're-
her
I,
they're-
mind.
I
Mhm.
I know where all my exes are. They live in Texas.
They live in Texas.
Obviously.
Yeah, it's a real humdinger, as they say down there.
But yeah,
No,
that's the thing, right?
I-
This. Sorry, go on.
I have to note that Fred, despite after wanting his son so bad, after all of that, he names the kid Jason, spelled Jasen.
Come on. Jason?
He's doing millennial, like he was doing the like, doing the millennial names a little earlier than I think or not millennial names, that like what millennials are now naming their kids. He was ahead of the curve.
Hey, how's it
Rex.
going? My name's Jason. Sorry, Jason.
Jason.
No. Jason. Jason? No. Jason.
Mm.
My name's Phoenix, and no, the Y is not where you think it is.
And three, I will also note 3 pages, not long pages, after this story about the abortion and all the horrible shit that it brings. It goes into this like really twee Time to address the questions that you want answered. Is masturbation a sin? If it is, why can't I stop it? If it isn't, why do I feel so guilty? And the biggest question of all, if God didn't want me to masturbate, why did he put my genitals within easy reach of my hands? And then in parentheses, on second thought, let's save that one for heaven.
Ah,
Why
got 'em.
even raise that fucking question? Because what a deranged. But like, it's not only they're not taking this very serious moment seriously nearly enough,
Right.
right? Like that's its own fucking thing to unpack. But also, like, it's immediately going into this intentional equivocation of this thing with masturbating. And then because, this one's just for the dudes, it asks this weird ass question that, once again, just because, everyone's going to fixate this specific line. I tried to solve that as a kid. I was like, there's got to be a reason why God did it this way. Which is like trying to like I don't really remember all the details. I just remember being like, no, that's a good question. Why don't they
5
answer that?
a.m. 5 a.m. and like teenage Jacob is on the floor with like the anatomical charts and protractors.
A life-size chart of the human body. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and then it goes into the chapter all about the M word, and it
Yeah.
says
The
yes,
M word, folks.
and it says let's get right to it. First things first, and I'm like, what? They're doing like the. I like that they're doing like YouTuber dialogue this early. Let's get right into it. Masturbation isn't addressed in the Bible, so there's no direct definitive scripture that says the practice is right or wrong. I'm like, okay, so gospel according to Fred from here
Right.
on out.
Right, here we go.
Is this true? Like, isn't Onan like about masturbation?
That's sort of another thing. That's a very specific story about a very specific guy.
There's a particular sin going on there that gets very can be very liturgical.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Different people litigate that in different ways. But yeah, no, the way that they land on masturbation is actually very strange. They create this unbelievably weird semantic argument. And basically
I think it's good.
You think it's good? Okay. Well,
Yeah,
as long as
no,
you
it's
think it's
good.
good. The dichotomy here, right? The dichotomy that they set up is between false shame versus true shame and marital masturbation versus what I guess must be non-marital masturbation.
Uh-huh.
And as you might imagine, these are pretty arbitrary distinctions, but they're like, yeah, the quote here. So unless a guy can figure out how to masturbate without any lustful fantasy, masturbation is technically a sin. But that begs other questions. That's not what begging the question is. Let's suppose a man can figure out how to masturbate without any fantasy, and he simply does it to release sexual tension. Where does that sexual tension come from in the first place? If all this sexual tension were natural and rooted in his hormonal makeup, that would be one thing. He'd have little direct control over it. But what if it isn't? What if it isn't all natural? That would be another thing entirely. For instance, what if he brought all this frustrating sexual tension upon himself by looking at internet porn during the last few evenings after work? What about the cumulative effects of renting Titanic on Friday night, watching nubile sweat-soaked girls in tight nylon shorts at the track meet on Saturday afternoon, and lightly rubbing your genitals against a girl during the slow dance at the Saturday night social? Fred Stoeker is one of the most incredible minds that the United States has ever produced.
When you
Straight
gotta
out of
rent-
Iowa.
Rent Titanic on Friday and then like commit sexual battery on Saturday.
It's
Yeah.
like watching nubile sweat. So it also gets so weirdly Socratic here, where it's like, okay, well, I hear this, Plato, but allow me to ask you another question.
And I like that when they decide on this, they disagree. They
Yeah.
actually, the one place the authors disagree is Fred says you can never jack off, and Steve says if you can do it without any lust or any
Yeah.
sexual thoughts, if it's purely mechanical.
It is an
and
actual
believe
Socratic.
me, I tried.
It's an honest to goodness Socratic dialogue on the nature of masturbation between Steve and Fred.
Insane.
Everybody loses.
And there's
Yeah,
a
of
legitimate
course.
and there's a legitimate gray area here, we are led to believe, because 98% of masturbation involves like visual or like physical
Yeah, stimulation.
Yeah.
Fred did the math, I'm sure. No, you have to. The only good way is to go to that dystopian hospital in China that Jordan Peterson posted about.
Oh yeah, that's the other 2%, clearly.
That was just a porn video. No, and I'm a big fan because it says deep false shame has no place in the equation. God isn't a father who shames his children after
But
all
what
that.
is
Like,
false shame?
and
This
also
is the thing. They
so
create
clearly he does shame his
they
children.
create this arbitrary distinction, like I said, between false shame and I guess true shame, but we don't learn what that actually means. So it creates this really weird like quandary because you're going to experience the shame. But rather than saying don't worry about it, like this shame is not valid, they want to consider the shame valid but not true. It's bizarre.
And then back to back, it throws out a few things. One suggestion is you definitely need an old male friend at church you tell when you jack off. Um, that's important.
That's
You
really
gotta
important.
establish that accountability partner.
How much of this is just Fred wanting guys to like tell him their jack off stories?
Yeah,
Is Fred-
apparently they do if these stories are to be believed.
Is Fred
You know.
Stoeker a bisexual king, do we think? And he's just been like
He's a
hiding that piece of it from us?
He's a bisexual peasant. Then it says, I have to throw this one out. It says the trouble with the tack is that masturbation is an implosion of sexual pleasure that versus, this one's a Jordan Peterson type. It's an
Yeah.
implosion of sexual pleasure that forces a guy further and further into himself. Sometimes when you masturbate, it's
think
further
of
and
the-
further into yourself. Am
Okay.
I right?
The
You
orgasm-
are right. Not enough people are talking about this. That's always an argument that I've thought was really funny. Like they make the sort of appeal to nature where they're like, well, of course, men and women should exclusively be having sex with each other because the penis and the
parts,
vagina
yeah.
are so naturally compatible. And it's like, okay, all right. The prostate is the male G spot, such as it is. Like, what do you? Is that not part of God's plan?
The prostate is the atheist nightmare.
Yeah.
And then I also just like at the same chapter, we don't expect anyone after having applied the forthcoming advice to later declare, gee, I just wish I had masturbated more. And I can, by the end of the week, get you like 100 people I knew growing up with that will just attest to this. Like, obviously with more than that. But so many people lived this and tried this and were like, yeah, no, I should have just done the normal shit. Like I should have just let it played out. Like, because obviously there's no one right way to do things, but holy shit, I definitely wish I had not done this stuff. I had not followed their advice. And specifically, I think the ultimate advice they give here is to not starve the sumo. And
You gotta starve that sumo.
I think I just got to read this. Enter the ring. And
Okay.
I want to be clear that this is the line that got quoted the absolute most at my church and school. Starve the sumo. This is an analogy that was used on stage. He didn't cite the book, but by a youth pastor at this big youth conference I went to with a bunch of churches, the sumo. This is a thing that got used a lot. I had a football coach who would bring up "Don't starve the sumo."
Yep.
A lot of that.
This shows up in the Every Young Man's Battle video as well. There's a semi-racist depiction of a sumo wrestler.
No
here.
doubt.
Semi.
Yeah, only semi. I'm hedging my bets because I don't remember how racist it was. I don't remember if it was the depiction that was racist. They might have literally just shown a sumo wrestler, but I remember the framing of it at least being,
Have you ever been channel surfing and seen two Japanese sumo wrestlers going at it inside a small ring?
Not while channel surfing, no.
In a sumo wrestling match, two bloated behemoths. Just gotta stop. Those guys are not.
They're jacked.
Yeah, no, they're built like football linemen. Racism showing up there. Dressed in loincloth diapers. Gross. Grabbed each other's arms and rammed shoulders until one gets knocked out of the ring. Well, picture your battle with masturbation as being like a sumo match. You're on one side of the ring, and your overgrown, bloated opponent, known as Mr. Sex Drive, is on the other.
Sorry,
If you
I hate to interrupt you here.
No,
But
please
you
do.
just there was an interesting point that you just made about how these guys are built like football linemen because in this very book there is a portion where Fred talks quite glowingly about a really, really impressive lineman who was
Yeah.
playing football against his son on a high school team.
Very strong. Also worth noting, when I read this section aloud to my husband, he just said Mr. Sex Drive could get it. You know,
Yeah, like what
Mr.
if you
Sex
were in the
Drive is the other.
Bears?
Yeah, is on the other. If you knock Mr. Sex Drive out of the ring, you don't have to masturbate.
That's the deal.
If Mr. Sex Drive knocks you out of the ring, you do have to masturbate. You're standing just inside the ring,
This
wearing
is a setup for a porno.
You're wearing inside the ring, wearing that silly white thong. Just click. He doesn't know what a thong is. This thing isn't a diaper, a loincloth, and a thong. What are you talking about? With your arms crossed and your gritted teeth bared, with piercing eyes, you snarl at Mr. Sex Drive to leave you alone.
Leave me
Mr.
alone, Mr.
Sex-
Sex Drive. That was Jordan Peterson for some reason.
Yeah, Mr. Sex Drive, bloated by a billion meals of lust and fantasy, yawns and looks at his watch. Then, appearing quite bored, he waddles over your way. Without bothering to lock arms with you in battle, he merely swings his huge thonged rear and sends you
his
flying.
befonged rear.
And sends you flying against the wall, where you dutifully sit down and masturbate on the spot.
On the spot.
Time and again.
I've seen this video.
Yes. And
I have
I've
been paid to write shit like this.
Sorry, and time and again, you fly against the wall, emptying jar after jar of Vaseline.
God damn.
And it goes on. It has him at one point where you go, Mr. Sex Drive, go in the name of the Lord. He waddles over and knocks you on your rear.
And then you have to jack off again.
And it says later that he should be built like a very small shrimp,
Right.
but you have fed him much sushi.
His measurements are supposed to be kind of similar to mine, actually. Actually, I think that looking at Mr. Sex Drive's measurements, he's 5'3", 110 pounds. My BMI is probably lower than his because I'm up 5'11" and 140 pounds, which means that I might actually just be Mr. Sex Drive.
You may be Mr. Sex Drive low key on
Low
the low.
key. This shit
gotta
got
get
me
you
feeling like a Mr. Sex Drive.
We got to
I
get you a
can't-
billion meals and then we'll see.
I also can't help but notice that like Mr. Sex Drive is just like, like how there are people who will like make videos just like of ignoring you, right? Just like you're beneath me and I'm over here looking sexy, but like that's Mr. Sex Drive. He appears quite bored. He's looking at his watch. He's waiting for this to be over. Like the rejection, right, is clearly a component of this.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
There's a fetish, the fetish of defeat, maybe, at the hands of Mr. Sex Drive seems to be something that excites Fred.
I especially like you feel this line here. You feel shame before God, especially after viewing all the empty jars of Vaseline lying around.
That's wild. That is some wild business.
I didn't have to make the joke. He made it for me.
I know.
And then he immediately goes and talks about Titanic again.
Yes.
And that movie specifically is why Mr. Sex Drive keeps kicking your
That's
ass.
right. Let's talk specifics by considering the movie Titanic. How did this film ever pull down a PG-13 rating? Also, it would have been PG in 1984. Shut the fuck up. The raw sexuality of the sketching scene alone should have qualified this film for an R rating. Frankly, that nude scene was reminiscent of some of the 1970s era X-rated flicks that I, in parentheses, Fred, we know, watched in the dorms back when I didn't give a fig about Christ's laws.
Ooh,
We-
not a fig.
It was
We-
PG-13. It was 97.
We aren't to have a hint of sexual immorality in our lives. How can the softcore porn in Titanic rest easily with this truth? And then I'm just going to sort of skip over a little bit and I'm going to read this next thing because, again, this is just pure Fred. And what of the days that follow? The alarm goes off. You lay groggily in the warm softness of your bed as you struggle to consciousness. Soon, the softness of her image seeps into your mind, and in the quiet morning light, your mind again fondles her curvaceous fullness. A gentle come-on smile plays across her lips as your engines churn higher and higher. helpless before her charms. You're masturbating again.
You shift slightly, like the mountain of jars you're buried in is disturbed.
Yeah, you're next to Mr. Sex Drive. What
Again,
did we
I
do
feel-
last night, man?
This feels autobiographical, right? Like this has to be a memory that he has. He saw Titanic, and then wouldn't you know it, 2 days later he was waking up in like that nice little like half lucid state, jorking it to his mental image of Kate Winslet.
Yeah, as a guy who had like lived his whole life for football, then failed off the football team, and then he's like by himself in his apartment, maybe full of Vaseline because maybe he fucking jacked off so much. And like, this is a sad
Yes.
man that
Yes.
needs help.
Yes.
Like-
Yeah, Jacob, I think you said it at the top of the episode where it's like this book is just him working through his problems, but he's making it all of our problems in doing so. He just tells on himself constantly, especially where he's like, you know how we all have these things as men, we all do these. You know, we all imagine our sex drive as E Honda. We all have just giant piles of Vaseline by our bed from jacking off. You know how we all do that.
we
He just
all see 20 joggers every day by the side of the road and almost crash our car at least half of those times.
They weave in and out of the fucking cornfields
Oh
while you're
my
trying to
God.
film videos for your Instagram
so
followers.
much so that I now have a system for not crashing my car when I see a jogger.
And Ryan, a system for knowing where all the billboards that have women on them are
Yeah.
on every route around his town.
I am not gonna lie. I did not grow up in like an extremely Christian environment. I grew up in an extremely conservative environment, and so much of this is just the exact same thing that I heard growing up, just repackaged in an evangelical tone.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
it wraps around to the exact same points of like your problems with sexuality aren't something with you, it's something with women, or it's due to some gender essentialism of you being a man. It's the exact same point, just given an evangelical veneer.
But the big difference is that in that situation, like obviously that is toxic in its way, but in this culture, it's also something that is ordained from on high,
Mhm.
meaning that if you don't agree with it, you are sinning, basically. Like you
Yeah.
are spitting in God's eye.
Yeah, and Jesus died, and Jesus saw all the, there's a classic post of, when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he saw every sin, which includes you blasting rope to Waluigi porn. But like it is that
I'm
though.
just imagining like a chapter being like, yeah, how many of us haven't, gotten done playing a game of Mario Tennis? And we're just really seeing that vile Dutchman's purple ass. And,
I mean, there is going to, I
Waluigi
mean,
Dutch?
yeah.
maybe there's an
I
every
think he might
young
be
man's
Belgian, actually. But yes, no, he is
Oh,
Dutch.
shit.
there's an every young man's battle that's going to be written by a guy that like grew up, in the 2010s. It's like, it's just, how it is when there's a girl's gat. You can't, but it's all the same stuff, like the updated version with like,
Every Zoomer's battle.
every Zimmer's battle.
No,
But-
we need to write the pornographic version. Every young man straddle.
Got him.
Lenore, you have more experience with that sort of thing than I do. I'll have to leave that one to you.
5 cents a word, baby.
And it is all
Wait,
like,
hold on. Lenore, are you the one who's been writing those Adventures in Odyssey smut fanfics on AO3? Oh,
It's not actually you, is it?
No.
Damn.
I don't have near the expertise. No.
Yeah, I didn't think so because I checked those out after them being mentioned. But I know
there's
Lenore has been commissioned in the past. for
there's
stuff.
sort of like two sides. There's somebody who's writing porno AO3 AIO fanfic that's very weird and upsetting, and then there's somebody who gets it and it's very funny. But the one that's very upsetting is definitely a little too obsessed with like the logistics of teenagers having sex.
I see.
Kind of
Yeah.
like Fred Stoeker.
Well, it's always you, right? The way Fred talks. Here's another quote. When some hot-looking babe in a French
Mm,
bikini walks by your
absolutely.
beach towel, your
This
eyes
is
have the
happening every
habit
day to a guy
of
like me.
locking on her. Yeah, in Iowa, sliding up and down. When the cheerleader with the biggest breasts walks past you in the hall, your eyes run away with her.
You know
When the
it.
Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue arrives in your mailbox every February, you're fantasizing over the curves and crevices, imagining what it would feel like if you could touch her there. So, how do you break the bad habit of locking on to every rack and tush that swivels your way?
I love I love the specificity of French bikini. Like, oh,
Doesn't he also talk about the joggers being in bikinis?
At one point, it all kind of blends together. Like Fred, by the end of this, is really just he's just hammering away.
He's
There is
getting
no
more and more
editor.
worked up. You can tell like he had to take breaks more and more frequently throughout the writing to go, honk off and come
Yeah,
back. And
he had to yell. What's his wife's name? I forget.
Brenda?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Brenda.
Brenda
if some point
runs
Fred
into the
had
next room.
if some point Fred had just realized that he had a thing for sweaty girls with abs, we wouldn't be having to read this book right now.
It's like, come on, like it's so. That's what's also kind of funny to me is that, I've read a fair bit of Dobson, right?
Hmm.
And I feel fairly comfortable saying Dobson is not a vanilla guy.
Hmm.
If you read his various writings on pornography, in the way that it inevitably leads, I guess, to like sadistic, degrading, and like full on snuff film type stuff, you would think, well, hold on, man. Maybe that doesn't happen to everybody. Maybe that's you. Like maybe you have a thing for inflicting pain. Given your writing, I think you do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But
Hmm.
like maybe just own it. Fred, on the other hand, is the most aggressively vanilla motherfucker alive.
Playboy drives him insane. And I
Oh,
like he's talking about like being at a barber shop and seeing a guy pick up a Playboy and he's just instantly like "Arr!" And it's like he is the meme of like the classic meme of the guy like normal guy whistling. He's like stupid asshole like pointing at him.
I've got a quote here, and this is pretty much just the Patrick Stewart in extras bit.
Mm.
Sometimes when I enter office buildings, the receptionist is standing. When I tell her my name, she'll typically bend over to use the phone to announce my arrival. Often, her loose fitting, silky blouse falls open to reveal everything. It's too late.
He
I've
lives in a
already
like
seen everything.
he lives in a Pornhub universe. How is this
Yes!
happening to him?
Yeah,
No,
I
he
mean,
has six weaknesses, he says. Six
Okay.
fronts he fights on. Number one.
Joggers, number
Well,
one.
number one is in order. Number
Oh,
one is lingerie ads.
okay.
Number two is joggers.
Two is joggers, right? Okay.
Three is billboards. Four is beer and bikini commercials. Five is movies. And six is receptionists. It is wild that like
It gets its own fucking category.
It's so
six
weird.
weaknesses in life, and one of them is reception.
Also, he's
these
a
are
fucking
these
what?
are all such boring things. This is everyday life.
I told
Like,
you he's vanilla.
I know you keep saying like he lives in a Brazzers commercial, but the repression is just doing this to him.
Right.
He's sexualizing everything because
Right.
he can't get over his own shit.
No, that's exactly right. And he's fucking lying when he says that joggers are not number one with a bullet. Like, come on, dude.
The lingerie ads. We can, there is like infinite crazy quotes in this fucking thing that pretty much amount to the same stuff. Like he
Yep.
does, like we said, start just sort of running in circles here as he's like giving you suggestions. The suggestions all amount to starve the sumo. Don't consume
Right.
sexual content. Don't have sexual thoughts to the best of your ability. Pray, find out where your weaknesses are. And like if you need to in the shower, listen to Christian music, don't lie naked in your bed, find whatever. Literally like make a battle plan, have a sword and shield, have a verse that you recite to attack and a verse for defense.
Right.
I'm not super clear on the difference when it's mental, but whatever. Um,
I did have one other little quote that I wanted to point up here.
yes.
This is toward the end, and for me personally, this is a very small thing that is probably the nastiest piece of business in the whole thing in terms of what it tells us about Fred. Because again, we've been talking this whole time about how Fred simultaneously wants to brag about his sexual exploits and conquests, to the point of probably embellishing or even inventing incidents, you know?
Mhm.
But at the same time, he wants us to admire him for how he himself has managed to starve the sumo, right? But at the end of the day, undergirding all of it is still this deep, deep, deep seated misogyny
Uh,
and this expectation that women will give him what he wants. So I just want to read this here. He's talking here about how when he was a senior in high school, there was this girl who was a junior, and he wanted to take her to prom. Jacob is currently shaking his head. He knows where this is going. This is like I said, this is a nasty, nasty bit of work. I'm gonna read the whole thing because
yeah.
I think getting to the punchline is just crazy.
Yeah,
So,
there's nothing we can say to describe it that
yep,
just like his own specific vernacular.
yep. And this
Yeah.
gives us a real insight into his mind because again, he is simultaneously trying to be like, uh-oh, this was bad, but also very much boasting. There's nothing wrong with our attractions. Many of us have been lost in our attractions. You may be lost in one right now. I, Fred, got lost in high school with Julie. I noticed her early in my senior year when Julie was a junior. You talk about hitting attraction buttons. Whew, I was carried away into a land of silly dreaminess whenever I thought about her. I thought about what I would say and how we would love each other and where we would go, my mind filling in billions of blanks since I knew nothing about Julie except her name and grade level. All year long, I dreamily longed for her, watching her bounce merrily by, like a jogger, uh, hoping for the day we would speak. I yearned to ask her for a date, but I lacked the courage. Even though I was the super stud athlete of the year, Jesus Christ, my heart
Fuck off. Yeah.
doing the world's biggest JO motion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My heart
The world's
turned
biggest
to
stroke.
my
Stoke.
my heart turned to raspberry jello when it came to girls. As the year wound down, one chance remained. The senior prom. Struggling fiercely, I dialed her phone number. After some meaningless small talk, I stammered out my request. She actually said yes. Her melodious voice affirmed my existence, and you can imagine what my mind did with that. Ugh. After the prom dance,
I can't actually.
no, are you going to? And I don't want you to tell me either. After the prom dance, I found the perfect place to take her, the Ironman Inn. While the traditional site for after prom dinners was the Highlander, because I guess there can be only one, I decided that I couldn't give my newfound love something so trite and dreary. In the secluded curtain booths at the Ironman, we could sit transfixed and not be interrupted on that glorious first night of the rest of our lives together. After being escorted to our booth, we bantered lightly, my heart pounding deeply within me. My attraction grew with each passing moment. Quietly secluded at the Ironman, we had the hostess romantically draw the curtains. Julie's ravishing face glowed, and her lovely full lips parted to speak. Enchanted, I listened dreamily. This is too many adjectives. Only to hear her say, I don't know how to say this, but I really, really wanted to go to the Highlander. Do you mind if we go over there? Clunk. Although my attraction for her shuddered wildly, chivalry and honor carried the day. And again, I'm thinking about that little bit that I was telling you about earlier, that journal entry where it's like, if she has sexual thoughts on her mind, if she isn't tied to me, if I don't own her, if I don't control her, right, then she's somehow bad, wrong, dirty. Mustering an air of nonchalance, I responded, sure, I guess so, though I knew this wasn't good for our date. At the Highlander, as we stood waiting to be seated, Julie brazenly asked, do you mind if I go over to Richie's table for a while? I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. She left me and spent the rest of the night with him. I ate alone with my thoughts, musing, this is why I like football better than girls. Later, she graciously threw me a bone, allowing me the honor of driving Her Highness home. She confided that she'd hoped all along to find a way to be with Richie that night, since he hadn't asked her to the prom as she'd expected. My attraction to Julie died that night. Now, there was nothing wrong with that attraction. True, I wasted a big part of my senior year being an idiot, but I never lusted over her, and I certainly never masturbated over her.
Whew.
Press X to doubt.
And also just grown man, right? Just fuming about this experience. That like, yeah, no, that sounds like a bad night, dude. Like, sounds like it
That'd be a
wasn't fun.
bummer
That's a bummer.
when you're 18, I guess, but like there's something about that kicker of I certainly never masturbated over her. That's so gross.
And this is like a part of why, like, I remember in college, I tried to write, and one of these days I'll do it. I tried to write like this sort of fiction thing, and one of the characters in it was going to be based on Fred Stoeker, and I literally had to cut it because I could not talk like him. I could not, you know it when you read it, but I could not like conjure that voice. There was, and like I'm glad that that doesn't come easily. But like I literally was like, you just there's a way of talking and thinking, and he's such a obviously he's indicative of this entire culture, but he is such like a weirdly specific avatar of it. But he is like a perfect embodiment of this part of it, which is why he's got so many books and they've been so successful and so lauded, and he can just make them and he can just speak about this endlessly. And like people, he does embody the culture and he does have the examples and the anecdotes just ready to go. It's wild.
Yeah, you know,
And
of this aspect of yourself being paramount, right? Of your relationship with God being crystallized in your sexual purity, you know? Like what do you do with this idea that you have to defend it at all costs? Suddenly, you know, everybody who might pose a threat to it or might interact with it in a way that you don't expect and you're not prepared for, suddenly all those people are the bad guy, right? I mean, I'm looking right here at like there's a bit late in the book where like, oh yeah, 6 different girls came up to me in my senior year, asked to be like my first one or whatever.
fuck
Like,
off.
you
Yeah,
know,
like no, they didn't.
and it's even worse if she's not Christian, because then she has no moral reason not to go to bed with you. Like, oh man, you know, the here comes the heathen, like after my virginity. Like it is just this bizarre
Going back from
adversarial
word
way of
virginity.
looking at the world and
Yeah.
women in general.
I've got another quote here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, it's even possible for a girl to race across your borders once in a while. So
Whoa.
you have to be prepared for that too. Remember, young women are just as influenced by our sensual culture as you are. One of our pastors told me, I'm starting to think that our girls are just as horny as the guys.
What a thought.
But don't get the idea that young women think like you about sex. They don't. They aren't visually oriented like you.
They will never find you hot.
It's not going to happen.
You are not an object of desire.
Not
ever.
happening for a guy like you.
Yeah, only for Fred.
Only for Fred.
Only-
That's right.
Only for Fred and Mr. Sex Drive. No, and it's also like this talking about like just owning someone. Like it talks about this is supposed to be a charming story, right? This guy that read every man's battle and became a better person. He's talking about his girlfriend turned fiance.
Mm.
Tracy and I started getting pretty close, this guy says. This is supposedly a guy that exists. And I got to thinking it could end up in marriage.
This is
but-
Fred here talking about a potential fiance, Tracy.
Oh, no, sorry.
This is Steve.
Neither. This is a guy that they talked to
Okay.
who said he was influenced by every man's battle.
Okay.
And, you know, whether we believe he exists or not, you know, make your own decisions.
It's immaterial, really.
I started thinking that I might really be able to do better than her physically. She was cute enough, but certainly no knockout. I'd always dreamed I'd marry a real babe. I read Every Man's Battle and started bouncing my eyes. You can probably guess what happened. Tracy started looking incredible to me. I even started getting offended when other guys looked at her, like a big brother protecting his little sister. I know this sounds trite, But when I stopped lusting over Tracy, I really did start seeing what was more of what was inside her heart than what was outside her. And I liked what I saw. And it's just very like obviously like possessive and weird and misogynistic and also like, I'm like her big brother now.
Yeah, that
And
doesn't sound trite. It sounds like something else, not trite.
Yeah.
it's like, it's just like a little story that happens and yeah, it's like, and if you do this, then Tracy will be hot, and she wasn't before, and like, what the fuck is this?
I do. There is a weird strain of territoriality that I'm
Well,
detecting
yeah,
here.
especially with the part about like the dads that we already talked about.
Right.
Yes, yes,
But
there
this
is.
is part of that as well.
It is absolutely. But like that's the thing is I can't help but think it's I can't help but think there's a personal quality to it, conscious or not, right? Because I mean, as we established like from the jump, right? He's looking for extreme malleability in this audience of his, right? His ideal audience reads this book and then gets braces on their partner's demand, right?
Right.
So if you subscribe to
Sorry.
that, like you can subscribe to anything. So what does he tell you to do toward the end? For example, right? If a girl's showing sexual interest in you, just play dumb. Just act like a dweeb.
Right.
Just like dress like somebody who like gets sand kicked in his face by a 300-pound like Adonis, right? It's like
Yeah, that's Mr. Sex Drive. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like
He's
it's-
back.
Fuck.
This is advice that
Falling
like,
out of the sandbox and
Yes.
jacking off immediately.
Is
This
it
is-
possible Mr. Sex Drive was the guy that she went to the table of at prom instead
and
of
his name
That
was Richie.
Yeah, Richie. We have a name. Sorry, go ahead,
This
Lenore.
guy needs help. I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
He's so he needs. This is not a man who should be giving, like, he shouldn't even be talking to kids, let alone giving advice to them.
Yeah, he gives his email at the end and he's like, send in your sex stories. It's really just
Especially if they involve like
No.
jogging.
yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure he wants someone to commiserate with. And obviously, we can go on and on. There's like every line in this basically can be riffed over. I wanted to just whew, say like, here and at the end, he's talking about at the end, they're talking about this possessiveness over women, this, and it all ties back in. And it's like, this is where it rhymes with what I read at the beginning. My friend Alex, who said at the girls who read Every Young Woman's Battle, right, at my high school, were also, this was as seventh graders, married to Jesus and told, you're married to Jesus now, and you're married to Jesus until your father gives you to your husband, and then you're married to your husband, like this possession, right? And it's obviously like misogynistic and like horrible on its face, but it's like part and parcel of this broad thing. And so, yeah, then they just bring it home and they're like, are you ready to fight this battle? We've laid out the battleground. And it's like, you've actually made it remarkably more complicated because now I don't know what the fuck is
Right.
going on. And there's so much shit I didn't even know I was dealing with.
Well, I'll
And
tell
I
you.
didn't realize
I'll tell you.
Satan was doing it.
Let me tell
Yeah.
you. Let me tell
Yeah,
you.
tell me.
I'll tell you. The biggest difference between boys and girls, men and women. You ready for this? The
Mm,
biggest difference is that sex is not a girl's top priority in the relationship. And you need to understand this very clearly.
yes.
Maybe it can most simply be said this way. Guys give emotions so they can get sex. Girls give sex so they can get the emotions.
My favorite Oscar Wilde quote.
Guys, girls want a relationship with you, but they should not have to give sex to get it. See, that I agree with. Of course that's true. Of course that's
Mhm.
true. But the reasoning is all wrong.
Yeah, I mean, women are just they're out here giving sex so they can get Carly Rae Jepsen's best album. It's
Yeah.
really confusing.
It is confusing.
I mean, this is crazy.
Um, and then like at the very, very, he gives you the call. Let's do it. Let's fight the battle. Rah rah.
He calls you maybe.
Yeah, he calls you maybe. And then at the very end, it throws out, by the way, if you're gay, you were maybe molested, or also maybe your dad wasn't there, or maybe
or
your mom wasn't
or
there.
maybe your dad molested you and then left. Hard to say.
Yeah, it's unclear. It's like there's a lot of theories. And then it's like if anything in your life happened, you could be gay, but don't worry, the science says you can ungay yourself. Um, and earlier in the book it throws out there was a guy that came to me and he said he jacked off so much he turned gay, you know.
I hate it
Eh,
when that happens. Can I just say that?
exactly. And it's like, you don't need to feel shame. You just need to tell somebody so we can fix you,
Um,
right? And I'm really glad I didn't follow this part of the advice, at least
yeah,
when I first read
yeah.
it. I don't know what point in my life I should have come out or did whatever. I don't know. I was just kind of going by the seat of my pants. But it's like, you know, not mentioned here is and if you really need help, we've got New Life Ministries who happens to have, a lot of great ways that we can, and I don't know all the details of how New Life Ministries carries out their gay conversion stuff. I don't know if they're like the most harsh out there, but I know that shit's damaging. And it's I don't know. It being tacked on and this weird thing at the end is it this was for me like the part I remembered maybe the most of the book, obviously given my own specific situation and being someone who was not molested, who was did not look at porn until I was not a Christian anymore. So I was like till I was like 16 or 17 or something like that, who had, parents that to this day they were good parents. They were there, they were present, they were everything they should have been, except maybe letting me read this stuff. Um, and then they were doing their best with what they have, introducing me to this. They, good, honest. They were being honest. I was like, okay, so the problem is me, right? Because
Yeah.
none of these other conditions match up. So the problem is me. And so I can fix it. And I tried different things to fix it. And I'm like, and I knew inherently, like it says you should tell someone, but I know I fucking shouldn't. I just know I shouldn't, right? Because the authority figures in my life I should tell were, mostly football coaches who use fag and fairy and all that as an insult. And I'm like, yeah, no, I have a feeling that these guys aren't going to be cool and normal. And so, yeah, it was really bad. And it's a really gross way to end the book. That's gross on every front. And it's it's bad, and I don't know what else to say about it. Yeah, it's not good, and I kind of wish they had like a whole chapter that actually goes into this because I think it would be very interesting to see. Because this is, very clearly not Fred writing here. I would really like a Fred chapter on homosexuality.
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
sure it'd be fascinating.
it would be, right? Because
Uh,
I mean, I was joking earlier about Fred being bi. I don't think he's bi. He's
no,
probably the straightest man who ever lived.
no,
But
yeah,
he does talk at some length about the way that his dad walked out on him.
yeah,
And I do think that he has a really fucked up idea of what masculine love means.
mm,
Like I think that you can trace some of his sort of territoriality and what is clearly fear that women will leave him. Like he never makes
mm,
it explicit, right? In all of these stories. But in that one that I read about prom, it's so clear that the fear of rejection is just that it's one of his ultimate fears. And I think it is because that's what will happen if it, or at least can happen, if somebody who is very important to you early on in your life leaves and you aren't able to integrate it back into your life.
mm,
And like, if you take his advice and you act like a dweeb when somebody comes up to you and like tries to initiate something, then yeah, you're never going to have to get into that situation in the first place. Like there's so much of this that's built around, quite apart from the whole quite apart from the whole bizarre statecraft project of trying to build this insular community that proselytizes through seizure of state power, like what we're seeing in, Project 2025 by what the right wing of our ruling class especially is involved in, there's just so much in here that's closing you personally off
Yes.
from anything that might unflatten you.
yeah.
The,
Anything except for like God and the church and the older men in your life that you should look to, and like even your sexual releases as a young man. should rely on nocturnal emissions, which happen every 72 hours if you're normal, according to this book.
That is
Um,
citation needed.
yes,
Um,
again, and I think he actually pulled from James Dobson on that one directly.
and I bet James Dobson did not cite a source.
No, James Dobson just comes his pants every 72 hours. In fact, he doesn't have to be sleeping. It could be anywhere.
Mm.
And I think citation needed on that as well. And I think also like it even like throws out the like God will take care of you on that. But you know, if you've been filthy, you might have a sexual dream and you should feel bad about that too. And
Yeah.
then also said like tells the story of a guy who like was like wanted a wet dream so bad and didn't have one, so he just jacked off, and then he had a wet dream, and he's like, "Oh, God did that as a joke on me." And it's like, the fuck?
What are you talking
Well,
about?
and then like he falls back on the fucking scientific explanation anyway. He says, "Oh yeah, well God also created this like secondary like mechanism where you just reabsorb your sperm," and it's like that's what was gonna fucking happen anyway.
And ultimately, like it is part of the project though that like even that has to be explained away and been like, no, yeah, your orgasms are actually under the control of God as well, and there's a system, and like you have to trust it, and if this stuff isn't happening that the most weird man in the world has written should happen and how you should feel, you are a deviant from the norm,
I
right?
mean,
And what that'll do is make you strive to be normal, whatever the fuck that means.
do you think that Fred Stoeker knows that women also have wet dreams?
Probably not. I would be shocked. At least when he wrote this, I don't know what enlightenment he's gotten in the last 20 years.
Well, they're emotional wet dreams, not
Right,
Yeah.
that's right. They just wake up from a dream where they're getting a really nice hug, and it's like, ooh, what's going on down there?
Just like
Yeah.
brain fluid is leaked out of your ears from all the like dreams of like a guy making dinner once in a while. Like,
Yeah,
that's done to you.
Brenda told him that she gets wet dreams, and he's like, "Oh, so women cry in their wet dreams." Yeah, they think that's what that means. So yeah, this is a bad book, and
What?
these are bad people, and
What's weird though is that
yeah,
I don't know.
I gotta punt them into the stratosphere or something. I don't
These
know.
days, and I don't think it was this way when I was, a little younger, but these days, and maybe it's just because I'm a little older now, all I can look at with something like this, all I can see, I should say, is all of the things that hurt for this person, for Fred specifically. Like, I think that at its core, every young man's battle is a portrait of a deeply, deeply broken man
Mm.
who decided at some point along the way that there was something too terrifying about, the mortifying ordeal of actually being known. And so he instead decided to give it all up to God, as is often the case in these situations, and then just sort of like come up with post hoc rationalizations for all of his neuroses.
Yeah.
And it's not just enough for him to have that be his own thing. He now has to inflict that on other people. And it's when that happens that I go from having, I think, some degree of sympathy and even empathy to just being like, this guy needs to be fucking stopped. This is not good.
And
You're
in
really, yeah.
all of that combines to in the year 2015, me sitting in an auditorium with 1,000 other young men, all of us having to chant "Starve the Sumo" together.
God, it's so weird.
Like, just talk about dominoes. God. I know Ryan's got something funny for us at the end here, but either of y'all have any other serious thoughts y'all want to get as we kind of wrap up this thing? Because I've said my piece.
I mean, it's we're really I think we're really onto something when we say that yeah, anything that you could like feel pity for him about, when you see what it's used for, right? The one like there's like one or two like sound things that he says that are couched in so much bizarre in such a deeply bizarre insidious project, like when he says that yeah, masturbation's not going to make you go blind, masturbation's not going to give you hairy palms. He's not saying that to dispel these myths. He's saying that because the minute that somebody masturbates and that doesn't happen, suddenly the mystique is broken. And And it's in service of crafting this much grander, much more damaging mystique. And it is breathtaking to come at this like, innocent, I say, quote unquote innocent, like just not having this be a foundational part of, growing up and my relationship to sexuality
You are
is
unblemished by
Mhm.
the world of the wonderful world of Fred Stoeker.
yeah, I mean, even Stokers need a little stoke.
So true.
Mm. It's on site with Fred Stoeker. And now I know what he looks like because I've
Oh, I
watched
bet
like probably
you could beat his ass. You've got advantage. You've got wrestling experience.
a Mr. Sex Drive
That's
moment.
right.
Yeah.
You're gonna force him to jack off.
Yeah, no, that's
You
that
come
would help.
home, Mr. Sex Drive is like, you left your jeans on the floor again. What am I going to do with you?
He thinks jeans are a thong because he doesn't know what the
Yeah,
word
yeah, yeah.
means. Yeah.
I'm thinking
Ryan, what did you
oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
oh, I was just that this is a throwaway joke, but
Yeah, do
something,
it.
and this is just not even worth interrupting anything for. But you know that Nine Inch Nails song, Mr. Self-Destruct? I gave you all you need to know. What if it was Mr. Sex Drive? That's all I have to say about that.
What if it was?
What if it was, dude?
That would be
Could
so
be
crazy.
huge.
I am
Yeah.
sumo in your head.
Yeah.
I will say I don't think I'm gonna be able to play Street Fighter anymore after this. Anytime I get hit with E Honda's critical art, I think I'm just gonna have to like log off and start JOing.
Yeah.
You got to do it. You were
It's
playing
gonna be
Nintendo with the boys up till 3 a.m.
It's gonna be really hard to explain at the local tournaments, but
Yeah. Lenore, there's
now I
a
have this great book to show them.
Oh yeah. Bring a copy around wherever you go. Lenore, here's a prompt for you if you want to write the fanfic, right?
Please.
This is Ryu/E Honda, and it's literally just the Mr. Sex Drive thing.
Let's go.
Make it happen, Captain.
That's good. Ryan, what you said you had maybe the modern day equivalent here pulled up.
I have some discourse.
Okay.
Okay.
So maybe
Bring
it's
us
just a
home.
little bit of a palate cleanser. I know we went into a lot of the like deep, dark places that this kind of stuff can take you.
Des Moines.
And obviously none of this is a good influence, nothing that Fred Stoeker has put into the world, but I think I've found that at least for a significant amount of people, this message doesn't hit in exactly the way maybe it intends. So what I have found, I have found the a Christian subreddit dedicated to not masturbating, and
What's it called?
it's called No Fap Christians.
Okay. Creative.
Because it's very much like the
Fred Stoeker made it. I know I
Gotta
know
be.
he's been on it
At the
least.
very
I'm
least, he's
certain.
lurking. Yeah.
I'm certain.
and a lot of the discourse that came up in this episode is currently being litigated in the modern
Oh.
day
Thank God.
among some of these some clearly obviously teenagers, but these modern day posters. And I thought that I would just take a selection of some of these posts and maybe just say how you would respond to them. And I have ordered them from least horny to most horny.
Oh God.
Okay,
Okay.
good. Good.
There's a few different categories of these posts that I found. The most common one is just streak updates, them just bragging about how long it's been since they've jacked off. I found one instance of a guy saying like, I'm jacking off right now, I'm so ashamed about it, I'm typing because I'm jacking off right now. There's a lot of people who seem to think semen retention is actual like magic and that it's giving them powers.
Well, Fred would be the most powerful man in the world.
Which seems a little blasphemous, but by far the best ones are people trying to find theological loopholes in when or not they can masturbate.
Hell yeah.
Let's
Which
hear it.
eventually just leads into people being just blatantly horny in these posts. So is having a girls with glasses fetish lust? If I look at girls with glasses on social media, YouTube searching up girls with glasses, and I'm thinking about is how attractive their face is with glasses, I lusting if I don't masturbate at all. I don't think about girls' private parts, and I don't watch porn at all. All I ever think about is how attractive their face look with glasses. Comments would be appreciated.
Okay.
Lenore as a girl with glasses.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Verdict.
I mean, I don't know what else to say. We're just built different.
Okay. Is this
Jake-
lust or not?
Yes.
Okay, we're giving it the
Okay,
lust.
verdict's
L
in.
for lust.
I'm hitting it with the L for lust.
Okay, is
Um,
this one lust?
No man is pure.
This post is just titled "Male Frontal Nudes."
Okay.
Um,
You have my attention.
is this pornography? More like photography or admiration of the male body. There is no sex, and I didn't masturbate till have an orgasm. Does it still count?
Didn't masturbate
Uh,
till have an orgasm.
Yeah, did you get part way?
Yeah, edging counts.
Okay, so this one's going under lust.
It's lust.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sorry.
lust.
Okay, here we go. This one is titled "Donald Trump Never Masturbate," and there is
Bullshit.
a link to a YouTube video that is unfortunately dead. Asmodeus, demon of lust. Bolded, Asmodeus is the demon of lust, responsible for exploiting sexual desires. He is mostly known from the Book of Tobit, but is also mentioned in the Talmudic legend and other
Oh,
notable
yes.
sources. Click here
We're getting
for
into the
an
Gnostic
image of him.
books and shit. I love
And
it.
I gotta say, I was really terrified by this link of click here to see Asmodeus, the demon of lust, but it was just drawn a Wizards of the Coast D&D
Oh,
depiction of Asmodeus.
Okay, I'm saying that one's not horny.
Probably
that one's
not,
Going
no.
that
That's
one's
ju-
going under the not
That's just
horny.
Asmodeus.
Mhm.
Yeah, he might be horny, but
He
this
might be.
poster is just informative.
I've been
I
to the
know
fortress
so
of
much more now.
Malshim and seen him with my own eyes.
Yeah.
This one's less interesting for the discussion. We discussed it briefly, but more for the top response, which is can I masturbate without porn, and is that okay?
Right.
And then he has like a paragraph
2% of all cases.
Yeah.
about jacking off without porn, and the top response is 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. I'm not sure if masturbating glorifies God.
Fred Stoeker comments.
That's a question that we have to answer.
Yeah, masturbating glorifies God. Next question.
Okay, watching my own sex videos. Hey guys, so I have a questing. Some things I like to do, the love sessions I have with my wife, then quote review the data at a later date.
Absolutely.
The data.
My question is it still porn if I'm watching myself?
I mean,
It is, and
yes.
it's good.
Yeah. Go for it.
It is, but it's not lust. How's that?
Not lust. Not
Well,
lust.
it's
Okay.
it's lust, but it's acceptable lust, right? Because it's lust
It's
for your
good
wife.
lust. It's cool lust.
I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you masturbate even when like you're just not feeling it because maybe you will feel it eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Just nodding sagely. I'm imagining everyone on the subreddit just like, yeah, they're like stroking their beards.
You just make a habit of it, yeah.
These are really the theologians of today.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The theologians of today. Quote, nipplegasms will make you ejaculate. Wish I knew. So I guess I'll start over for the X plus 1 time. Okay, and now I have probably the pinnacle of this.
Okay.
This post is just titled Lent. I practice nofap with the help of a chastity device. I wear it whenever my wife tells me to, and I also voluntarily whenever my urge to masturbate is strong. This year, for the 3rd year in a row, I'm choosing to wear it for the duration of Lent, February
Yes.
14th through March
Oh.
30th. I'll only be unlocked for my wife's pleasure and then only orgasm if she allows. I'm doing this as a fast, a way to direct my attention toward prayer and repentance and away from my bodily appetites. It will also serve as a reminder of my dependence on God and that I am not the center of the universe. I wonder if any others are also doing this no fap for Lent. If so, you are not alone.
If there is a modern Fred Stoeker, it is this guy.
Absolutely.
That is Fred Stoeker a few years later, 100%.
Except Catholic.
Yes.
But yes,
And
absolutely.
funny enough, I found exactly one post asking about every young man's battle.
Yes. And what did they say?
They hate it.
Why's that?
There is one guy that says, I recently read Every Man's Battle and I thought it had plenty of good insight. And that's the only person. The rest of this thread is talking about pretty much everything we covered in this episode. It's like, yeah, this book is trash. Like, yeah,
Huh.
it puts some like it's a really detached view of women's bodies and sexual experiences. He has a really weird view of like teenage girls' bodies. Like he seems like he is giving young men bad advice by telling them that they have to be this sort of like horny goblin, which was really a breath of fresh air to see in this community dedicated to essentially agreeing with the points of every young man's battle.
Huh.
That even some parts of it might be going a little bit too far to catch into even true believers of this.
You know what? Maybe the kids are all right.
Maybe, I like to imagine it's Fred Stoeker who made the original post, like saying, every young man's battle, pretty good, right?
It kind of does. It kind of reads like that.
It's pretty solid, and the author's hot. And
Why
made good
does it
point.
get so much
He's-
heat from some Christians?
He's really good at football.
I'm hearing Stanford might want him back now.
If I don't get 5 affirmative comments on my post, my wife won't unlock my cage.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for coming on this absolutely insane episode. We're really upping the ante with every time you come on. I don't think we're gonna top this one with just insanity,
We're
but
upping
we
the
don't.
ante. We're upping the episode length.
We're upping.
This is what I do. This is what I love to do.
That's so true. Josh, a lot of people are going to know who you are, but if they don't, tell us about your podcast. Tell us about who you are.
Well,
Give us the plug.
My name is Josh. I kissed dating goodbye, and I have fought every young man's battle. I also co-host a podcast called The Worst of All Possible Worlds. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Worstpossible.world is our website. We also have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/worstofall. And basically what we do is we just talk about media. Every week it's a different piece of media. We talk about the narrative choices made within the media, and then also how that media, both as a narrative and as a broader property, shapes the world that we live in. So kind of like this, we do media analysis. And if you're looking for a place to get started, I would definitely recommend going back and checking out our episode on Every Young Man's Battle.
Yeah.
Again, we focused mostly on the really weird video. But if you just can't get enough of Fred Stoeker, and I know you can't, go check it out.
Absolutely. And also if you want to hear more, of our collabs, you can go back because we have had Josh on. This is the 4th time. We've had also AJ and Brian came on to talk about, Tony Kushner and to talk about Peer Gynt.
Yes.
So,
and we had y'all on to talk about Adventures in Odyssey at one point.
we sure
too,
did.
so.
That one's going to require some lore probably, because that is like pretty deep in the plot, but it is absolutely worth examining if you want to get into another side of the Christian right.
I'm always down for a tour through that sordid landscape.
You think, and I'd like a collab. I'd like Every Young Man's Battle to be read by John Avery Whitaker in
For
his
sure.
voice from start to finish.
You
Well-
you get knocked over by Mr. Sex Drive. He knocks you out of the ring. You start jacking off and saying, "He what?"
Lenore, do you have anything to close us on here? Sometimes you have.
Yeah. No, I'm spent, you might say.
We've only been recording for 3 hours and 16 minutes.
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
about
at
like
this
some
time of-
really harrowing shit. Then I know how I can bring it home here. 1 second.
In the meantime, one more post from the Christian NoFap Reddit.
Sure.
Yeah, what do they got?
Remember to pray for Israel, parentheses, God's chosen people,
Absolutely.
which is then a paragraph of
If you jack off, it'll hurt, Israel.
Yeah.
which
Sure
is
do
met
it.
by just unbridled anti-Semitism in
Of
the
course.
comments.
Of course.
And also, what does this have to do with not jacking off?
Okay, well, here we go. on page 47, Fred raises an example of a movie that you might like. Alongside Pearl Harbor, he also raises the movie Gladiator as an example of a good movie for men to watch, manly fare.
Wait, he says that Pearl Harbor is a good movie?
Yeah, he says we know you
That's
prefer movies with a manly fare like Gladiator or Pearl Harbor.
that's the worst thing he says in the entire book.
If you take a girl to see Pearl Harbor, that's a date which will live in infamy.
Mm.
I, you know, being a follower of Stoker last week, I don't know how long it'll be till the episode comes out, but so probably 2 weeks ago,
Yeah, dedicated
saw
Stokerian.
as a Stokerian, as a real
A real
Stokehead.
stochastic person.
Yeah, I watched Gladiator too. And I have to say, I watched that entire movie, and never once did Mr. Sex Drive emerge. He never did battle against Mr. Sex Drive or anything like that. But I did see Denzel Washington. Okay? And Denzel Washington in that movie does kiss a man. And I have to say, in that moment, I did question, is it possible that I have I've thrown off my hormonal imbalance because I have been promised by Fred because
By Fred.
I'm trying to remember exactly what I was trying to say. It doesn't matter. Denzel Washington was hot in that movie, and it wasn't a very good movie. Fuck you, Fred Stoker. Y'all have a good one.
Peace out.
Peace out.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.